Good morning, members. Good morning, members of the public. You're all very welcome here this morning for today's planning meeting. Just before we start, I'd just like to introduce my colleagues here on the top table for the members of the public to be aware who they are. If I start with the solicitor, council planning.
Yes, good morning, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian Dupray. I'm the solicitor. Am I switched on now?
You are now.
My name is Ian Dupray. I'm a solicitor. I'm here today to be legal advisor to the committee. Myself, hopefully I can be heard now. My name is Ian Dupray. I'm a solicitor and I'm the legal advisor to the committee.
Good morning, I'm Mark Russell. I'm the Area Planning Manager.
Good morning, I'm Robert Carmichael, Governance Support Officer.
Jack Wilkinson, Principal Planning Officer.
I'm Claire Philpott, Governance Support Officer.
Peter Beer, Chairman of the Plan Committee. Members on my right are members of the Plan Committee, and I will introduce them as they speak. They do have their name plates in front of them. And the ward member, Councillor Hurren, is on my right. Left, your right. Okay, we'll continue. I'll first ask the officer to read out the health and safety regulations.
Thank you, Chair.
Close to the mic.
May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the lifts. Cold water is also available in the breakout area opposite the lifts. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room via the following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town training pitch and remain there until you are told it is safe to return. And could I please ask that you switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just read out the legal bit. The council, members of the public and press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. Any member of the public who attends a meeting and objects to being filmed should have advised the committee clerk. As far as I'm aware, no one has indicated that they will be filming or that they do not want to be filmed. Is that still the case? Yes, thank you. In accordance with the Council's Plan and Charter, members of the public are not permitted to communicate, whether verbally or in writing, with members of the committee during the course of this meeting, including any adjournments. If a member of the committee is approached by a member of the public, they must immediately draw it to my attention and also to the attention of the legal advisor present. If a member of the public attempts to communicate with a member of the committee, then they may be asked to leave the meeting. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items, which I don't think there are any. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the council to have consented to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn off when you have finished? And it is important, members, that you get close to the mic so that the public can hear you. Thank you. Item 1, substitutes and apologies. I think we just have one. Councillor Hurren.
Chairman, good morning. I am substitute today for David Busby.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, we do have... Thank you, Chair. We have an apology from Councillor Owen this morning.
Thank you.
Chairman, if I might, just because there's a lot of people here who might not be aware of our usual procedures. As we've just noted, Councillor Hurren is here today as a full member of the committee, substituting for the absent Councillor Busby. He would have been invited in any event to speak but not vote as the ward member. My understanding from my conversation this morning with Councillor Hurren is he's chosen on the Boxford item to sit apart and speak but not vote. Then he'll rejoin his colleagues for the rest of the committee, and that is quite acceptable.
Thank you. Right. Item 2, declarations of interest.
Thank you, Chair. I've just had a thought. I'm not sure whether it's relevant for this committee, but I am an employee of Schools Choice, and in that capacity I work with both Boxford and Watfield schools to advise head teacher.
That's a non-pecuniary interest. It can just be noted. No problem.
You can continue to sit in the meeting and take part. Councillor Jemison.
Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest in the Watfield applications as I'm the ward member for Watfield.
That's not an interest. I mean, it's... Can you use I'm sure, I mean, so when on that item, Councillor Jameson, your usual practice is to invite the ward member to begin the debate, isn't it, Chairman? So that's not thank you for mentioning it, but we don't need to formally note it at this stage.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's to item 6D, Sudbury South East. It's the Crown Building, Newton Road. I have declared a non-pecuniary interest in previous meetings when this has come to committee, and it's a non-pecuniary basically that I have the residents in Bellevue Road. I have advised on policies, but nothing else, and I've kept well away from anything else.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm sorry, Councillor Hurren.
Chairman, thank you. Although it has been mentioned, I think I should officially declare an interest on item 1, land east of Sandhill, as I cannot really claim to be impartial.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hurren. Right, I think we can now move on. Item 3, to confirm the minutes. We haven't received them yet, but they are on their way, but I'll ask the officer to comment.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm with regards to the minutes that we're awaiting legal sign-off on those from the last committee. So my colleagues are still working on a draft of that, and they will be presented to the committee at the next, at the next committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, they normally have to be signed off by legal. It's just taken a bit longer this time. Right, we'll move to item 4. Sorry, Councillor.
Before you move on from the minutes, I believe, and I was present, so I hope it was correct, that the last meeting we did actually say that the Slough Road Brantham application would just come back to this committee meeting for the approval of the reasons for refusal. As we haven't got any minutes, and the minutes would have said that that would be coming back to this meeting for approval of the reasons for refusal, why have we not got it before us today?
I'm not sure that we actually said it was coming to this meeting. I think the words I might have used was at the very next convenient meeting that we could get it to. But I'll check for you.
Well, I presume that the officers nodding their heads have been listening to the transcript of this of that meeting, because they weren't actually present at that particular meeting. But we gave the reasons. It was just a question of the detail being filled in by the officers.
I'll get a view. Okay.
Thank you for asking that question. You're quite right. One of the area managers, Jo Hobbs, was here for that meeting, and she's been on leave. She's back now, so we'll get it to the next one that we can. And she was at the meeting, so she'll know what the reason should be.
Thank you. So it's the next one that she can get it to. Yeah.
Might be.
Which might be the next meeting, but it may not be.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just come back again and say, well, one of the reasons for these fortnightly meetings was that there was a backlog of applications that we had to get through. Now it appears that the backlog is in the paperwork to catch up with the meetings. So perhaps we should revert to monthly meetings, and then we can actually conclude the business fully at those meetings.
Your point is taken, but I think at the moment the meetings are as lined out. But we did say that we'd try and get it back as quickly as possible, and so that's what we will try and do. Members of the public, rather than you stand, you're welcome to come through the door and sit on that back row over there. Perhaps the officer, you can just go and point it out to them. Yep, you're right. Just keep going along there. Try not to press the mics, though, please. Thank you. Right, we'll move to item 4 now, and that is to receive notifications of any petitions. Rob?
Thank you, Chair. We have one petition to report to committee this morning. It is in respect of the first item on the agenda, this first application that will be discussed by committee. It is signed by 144 signatories of the following statement. We, the undersigned, petition the Planning Committee at Baber District Council to reject the Catesby Estates application, reference DC 19-01873, to build 80 new homes on land to the east of Sandhill, Boxford, in a locally important Rolling Valley farmland area with poor access to Boxford Village. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we have noted that, and that's been done. Any other petitions?
No, Chair.
Right, then we'll move on to item 5, which is site inspections. Officers, do you have any site inspections? No. Members? No. Right. We've all got next Wednesday off. So we'll move on to item 6, and that is plan and application to be determined by the committee. We'll take 6A, which is on page 5. Can I just ask, do members of the public have some copies of what we're dealing with? Have you handed out any copies?
All that we've got, Chair.
Oh, right, you've handed out all that we've got. Fine. On page 5, land at east of Sandhill, Boxford, Suffolk. The case officer is Jack Wilkinson. Over to you, Jack. There's obviously a short delay with technology here. Oh, here we are.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the public. I'm Jack Wilkinson, Principal Planning Officer. First item is item 6A. It's an outline planning application for the erection of up to 80 dwellings, including vehicular access, land to the east of Sandhill in Boxford. First aspect we'll be looking at is the principle of development, including access to this core village. It's a good start, isn't it? Right. Oh, that's all right. That one. There you go. So, which one? This one? How does that one? You can just point it that way. So as mentioned already, it's an outline application for up to 80 dwellings. This was expressly requested for a member site visit last week by Councillor Bryn Hurren in interest of assessing the site first-hand on the ground. Members did undertake that site visit last week on the 18th. In terms of location, we're located to the east of Boxford, north of the AONB. As shown, the site is located on the east to the north of Hadley Road, which runs along the south, and we have Sandhill along the west. In terms of connectivity to the larger towns, in terms of Hadley to the east and Sudbury to the west. It's a 5.71 hectare site.
Press no. Press no, Claire.
Apologies. It's a 5.71 hectare site bound to the north by domestic property and also by an exception site to the northwest, Sandhill to the left, Hadley Road along with domestic residents along the south. The eastern boundary is relatively open owing to the agricultural nature. These are all the constraints which I will break down in a moment, and we will talk through that. And effectively, the site as outlined in pink, members may wish to note the public right-of-way which runs through the centre of the site, off left and indeed off right. That is part of the definitive map. We also have the conservation area boundary and also deeper into the heart of the village, the flood zone identification by the modelled EA flood maps. There's also a TPO tree belt along the north, which is outside the application site. So in breaking down those constraints that are of material consideration, as I've said, the public right-of-way which runs through the centre, again, definitive map which links off towards this part of Boxford, which I'll come on to later. This line here is the outline of the conservation area. As you can see, there is some distance between the application site proper and the conservation area, and indeed the heart of Boxford Village. In terms of flood zones 2 and 3, they are effectively laid out as shown. The site is not within any identified flood zone other than flood zone 1, whereas most parts of the country are indeed part of flood zone 1. This is not within a concerning area. In terms of the local flood authority comments, there is no objection raised from the local flood authority. Infiltration tests have been undertaken and the site is readily capable of accommodating the development proposed and indeed any sealed surfaces. I've chosen to highlight the public rights of way in a more bold colour, mainly so you can see that, but also so that you can understand where it takes you to and from, bearing in mind the connectivity from the eastern part of Boxford. The final slide in terms of constraints outlines the relationship to the built-up area. Boxford is a core village. We have the defined outline of the built-up area. You can see that the site is suitably related in terms of the spatial layout and its relationship to this part of Boxford. And it is worthwhile noting we are in a countryside location, however we do adjoin. And in that regard, CS2 is engaged, as is CS11, in terms of its relationship to the core village. Looking at an aerial, this is an agricultural piece of land. Much of Baber and Mid-Suffolk is classified as grade 2 and 3 agricultural land. This is a grade 3 site, 1 being the best quality agricultural land, 5 being the worst. As I've said, the majority of Baber is class 2 and 3, and there's no reason to discredit the application on that basis, given the location of the district. This is the indicative master plan provided by the applicant. As you can see, whilst this is not fixed, it does show the quantum of development. The lowest lying point towards the northwestern corner. One element that is fixed, that I will go on to discuss in a moment, is the access. It's also worth noting as well, and members, again, you may recall, we stood just where I've indicated with the marker, looking up out of the valley. the land rises from west to east across the agricultural land. This is a view from that gate, which we viewed last week. You may wish to follow the arrow along the bottom left-hand corner, which shows where the photo was taken from, projecting to. This is a view from Hadley Road down into the valley. This is a view east. You can just about see the crest of the hill. Along the southern boundary. And the lowest lying point to the left of the gate where we stood. This is along the northwestern corner. This is from the highest point taken on site in terms of the boundary, which we can obviously see from the red outline, looking down into what is currently the exception site, into what would be the village. You can't, in essence, see the main bulk or heart of the village because the land does continue to drop, as we know. This is an inner site view. You can just about see the well-trodden public right-of-way that is marked through. And again, that's on the definitive map issued by Suffolk County Council. You can see the biggest and best trees that are located off-site. These are protected by TPO and the scale of the exception housing. So back to the indicative plan. And I'd like to look at a few aspects of this which are, in essence, bound by Section 106. So as part of the 80 proposal, 35% is for affordable housing. We also have highways improvements, along with a minimum public open space provision. I think that's important to secure that in the interests of, say, for instance, you are minded to approve, a reserve matters application comes in, those aspects are dealt with. That's in your papers as reported. So zooming in on the access, if I may. We have Sand Hill, which leads onto Ipswich Road or Hadley Road. It's actually Hadley Road from the right-hand point. On the Earth map, it shows as Ipswich Road, but it's Hadley Road. It's a 40-mile-an-hour stretch. I'd like to jump into the detail of the actual configuration of that access. As you will note, hopefully you can just about see it, the access is at this point. And I have chosen to jump through, and again, this is the defined red line outline, including the access splay and width, along with the frontage. And again, the access point here, it's important to consider the visibility splay, which is secured at 68 metres. That is above and beyond local highways authority recommendations. It's also worthwhile noting as well, members, again, you may recall when we looked on site, the 40-mile-an-hour signs are located at this point here, the speed signs. As part of the proposal, there would be an extension of the 30-mile-an-hour zone right up to what would be the 40-mile-an-hour stretch. So you've got a 40-mile-an-hour stretch along Hadley Road, into the dip and out. This section here would be made 30. Looking right out of sight, again, a 2.4 metre setback in the same way that we did for looking left is secured at 100 metres. Again, this is above and beyond highways requirements. If you look at the navy arrow, that's set at 120 metres, dependent on foliage. And again, this is a 30-mile-an-hour stretch down into the hill. So in terms of pedestrian footway, connectivity is going to be a crucial part of, no doubt, what you will discuss and debate. Connectivity into the heart of Boxford is a fundamental feature. As such, the developer has looked to include a new footway that leads into the centre of the village. And as highlighted in yellow, residents could in essence walk from site via the public footpath, which would be of good quality and that is secured through agreement. I've had to break up the actual view of the connectivity into the village, given the distance, into some concise slides. Hopefully you can relate in terms of the plan and, as highlighted, the proposed footway. You'll note the proposed footway, as shown on the right here. This is the access into Station Field. We parked just off shot, and we were able to walk from this point down into the village. And I don't see that being an issue in terms of access for residents. This is the footpath that we walked, leading down into the centre. And again, this is the area that we gathered upon. So we have Sandhill, Ellis Street and Cox Hill. I referred earlier to the public right-of-way, which comes in and links off to Cox Hill and Ellis Street on into the centre. So residents would have a choice. Ultimately, if they choose to get into their car and drive elsewhere, they do so. But at the same time, they do have the option, and the option is that you can use the public right-of-way or indeed the pedestrian access that would be provided. And I will just highlight those areas so that they are clear in terms of what is to be proposed and provided in yellow as a means of public footpath. The green outline is an improvement to the bus stop, and we have consulted our heritage colleagues, and heritage colleagues have no concern with these features within what is now the conservation area, subject to materials, for instance. Further on into the heart of the village, the developer has recognised that there are in some instances some pinch points, i.e. could you realistically traverse down the footpath pavement unhindered and with ease. And I think the identification of this point, for instance, is an aspect that's been carefully thought through. And I have just provided, it's a slight exaggeration in terms of the line, but it does show what is proposed, and that is to widen this section. And the proposed drawing, which is accurate by topographical survey, is as shown. So I think it shows quite careful consideration as to how pedestrians could indeed walk from the site into the centre of the village. So again, back to the map. I will highlight these in a sec, but you can see that these yellow points here demonstrate where access could be made from, and also here, in order to gain access. And I have highlighted that. We have pedestrian access along the south, which is readily available, linking through. There is a section here where residents would have to cross the road, and I make that crystal clear, but you could walk into site. I think it's also worthwhile mentioning the fact of the appeal case at Daking Avenue, whereby the inspector resolved to conclude that the site in that case was not acceptable in terms of its access. Now, the inspector was crystal clear in his description of that access for the pedestrian. So he found that there would be obstructions in terms of wheelie bins, in terms of telegraph poles down Swan Street, which is the other side. There would be a multitude of parked cars, and there would be an awful lot of pinch points, i.e. narrow points whereby you couldn't necessarily walk down. Say, for instance, you had a buggy. Now, your officers conclude in their assessment, along with the local highways authority, that there are large differences in that case to this, whereby there is good quality footpath existing and proposed. So the link up between the site and the heart of the village is acceptable, as opposed to what the inspector found in the Daking Avenue case. And I think members should be mindful of that as they draw their own conclusions. So just to draw final summary, it's a 5.71 hectare site with up to 80 units, of which 35% are for affordable housing. The spatial parameters for the affordables are fixed and set, so the developer would be required to provide homes that are of a suitable mix and tenure. That would be bound in the Section 106. Your officers conclude that this is a core village and it is a sustainable location within which there are adequate services and facilities and amenities available. That is itemised in your report. The access for the vehicle is acceptable as per the highways recommendation, with no concern from the flood and water engineer. Public open space would also be included with a management company to a minimum of 1.87 hectare, so it's a good space. And your recommendation as such is for approval, subject to the conditions contained within the report and the 106. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have the lights back up, please?
Phil Wallace.
Right, we have members of the public present who wish to speak. We have Phil Wallace, Parish Council. If you, sir, would like to come forward to the front row at the end. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. You can sit or stand, whatever suits you. And at the end of that, perhaps should remain seated or standing, and I'll see if there's any questions for you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Phil Wallace. I've lived in Boxford for 20 years, and I'm here to represent the views of the Parish Council. Elizabeth Thomas, the Senior Labour Policy Strategy Planner, is quoted in her report of April 2019 saying the proposal is significantly large and disproportionate for the existing pattern form of settlement. Her report clearly shows that she understands the difficulties the village faces with the scale of this development. This report is included in the case officer's report, but interesting, a last paragraph was left out, and this stated, the site is unsuitable and would undermine the emerging plan-led approach to growth, which paragraph 49A of the MPFF, Feb 29, does not support. The size of the development and its location are not in keeping with the desires and wishes of residents in a poll carried out at the beginning of 2019. The Parish Council and residents are not opposed to development within the parish, but feel that this should be in line with the need of the neighbourhood plan, which is being implemented at the moment, calling for smaller developments in the parish, and the proposal is at odds with the local plan policy CS2. The access road from the development will exit onto Sand Hill, where pedestrian access is poor, requiring pedestrians to cross the road to enter the village, creating hazards for pedestrians. Further down, as one enters the village via Ellis Street, there is also no footpath for some distance, and the road is narrow with parked cars, resulting in pedestrians having to walk along the road to access the village. CS15 states that connections between any proposal should be continuous. The proposals to put in extra pathways would result in the reduction in the width of the roads, resulting in increased problems for traffic access and parking. The increase in traffic resulting from the development will exacerbate the problems already encountered in the village, not only from the access to the village from the development, but also in other areas where traffic must regularly mount pavements to pass each other. Swan Street in particular will suffer as residents regularly use this road to gain access to Bury St Edmunds, Newmarket and Cambridge. The issues relating to the congestion and pedestrian safety were clearly upheld during the decision regarding the Phase 2 of Goodlands development. Pedestrian safety issues will be increased with the extra traffic arising from the development, in particular the safety of children who either travel by foot to Boxford School and those pupils gathering at various points in the village to catch buses to schools in Sudbury, Hadley and Ipswich, where pupils have to regularly stand on the roadside waiting for buses. It is felt that highways have not taken into account Boxford's unique road system and have not considered the recent findings regarding Swan Street during the Goodlands development decision and the already unsafe junction at Cox Hill and Sand Hill. The recent reduction in the frequency of Beeston's bus service between Sudbury and Ipswich will also encourage residents to use their cars for travel outside the village. The increase in school-aged children needing placement will also have an impact on the village. At present, although there are some places at Boxford Primary School, there will need to be provision for pupils to be placed outside of the village, which will increase traffic. Currently, it's been identified that the school cannot expand at its present site and already is taking pupils from Stoke Benayland and Assington and Newton Green, where there are already new developments having been built or in the process of being built, which will invariably increase the amount of pupils applying for places at Boxford School. In conclusion, Boxford Parish Council urges the committee not to support this application, taking into consideration the letter from Boxford Parish Council, the views expressed by our residents in writing and verbally to the committee, and in particular the report from Elizabeth Thomas to the case officer Jack Wilkinson in April this year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Members, is there any questions you wish to put to the Speaker? Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Chairman. You told us your concerns about footpaths and safety of pedestrians. What do you think of what we've heard from the planning officer about the improvements to the footpaths, and do you think that would address it?
I feel that residents are still going to have to cross that road on Sand Hill, but further down when you come onto Wells Street, the proposal to put in a new footpath on the left-hand side going down, there's an embankment there, which I'm led to believe is actually privately owned. If a footpath is going to put in there, it's going to then reduce the size of the road there because cars park along where that footpath is going to be, so it's going to create more pinch points as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Parker?
We're on. Super. Sorry about that. Could you tell us, Ms Wallace, do you know, with the addition of potentially 80 new homes, what percentage increase that will result in terms of numbers of houses within the village? Do you know that information?
I believe that the amount of properties we have, or residential properties in the village, amounts to around between 550 and 600 at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Jemison?
Morning. You say there's places in the local primary school. Do you know how many places and the long-term, number of places that will be available in the school?
I'm not quite sure, but I think there are around between 15 and 20 places at present.
And do you know anything about the longer term, like in the? I know that the Suffolk County do have longer, but what's coming up in terms of proposed children going to the school?
I think, Councillor Jemison, that's really a question for the officer. I think they can give you the answer to that. I'm not sure, unless you knew, but I don't think it's a question for the applicant, for the parish council. Councillor Barrett.
Just one final thought, question for you. So currently, we understand from the report that there are 18 pupils attending Boxford from outside. Sorry, there are currently 18 pupils attending Boxford from outside the village. Do you encounter problems with traffic from those parents who have to attend from outside Boxford?
Definitely, yes. I mean, we can encounter problems with residents in the village at the school, let alone people coming from outside of the village. It's a major problem for us at school times, at peak times, entry and exits from school.
Thank you. Councillor Norman.
Thank you. Yes, good morning. I just wanted to ask, obviously, you mentioned that you're currently going through the neighbourhood plan process. Just wondering if you carried out any type of housing needs survey or anything like that to identify any sort of proven local need for the housing requirements in Boxford.
I'm not actually involved with the neighbourhood plan committee, but I was involved briefly with the poll or the survey that was sent out towards the end of last year and beginning of this year. And the residents who were polled who responded, the majority felt that housing needs should be smaller houses, 1 to 2, 3-bedroom houses with sheltered accommodation and affordable housing. Not large developments, but small developments between sort of like 4 to 5 houses and infill developments as opposed to big developments on the boundary of the village.
Thank you. I'll see if I can get our officers in due course to clarify that point for you. Members, any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Would you like to make a comment on what you've just heard and the question?
Thank you, Chair. As a point of clarity, a local housing needs assessment has been undertaken by the developer, and that showed that there is a deficit in that regard. The second point around schools and capacity has been looked at in depth by the Development Contributions Manager for Suffolk County Council. And he's identified that the school is in a position whereby it would not be able to expand by nature of the constraints that affect the site, mainly flood zone, and also the capacity in terms of space. With that in mind, he has recommended that the developer provide a contribution for schools transport over a short period to, in essence, bus pupils to nearby Stoke Nayland. Now, that would be bound by a £134,400 contribution, which would be secured through the Section 106, and that would be the position on many a development within Boxford or on the edge of. I think it's crystal clear that the County Council have a duty and obligation to deliver adequate provision for schools, whether it's new homes or existing, and that's what the developer has agreed to comply with.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, we have an objector, Chris Village. You, sir, have also 3 minutes. You can sit or stand, and perhaps at the end of that you'll remain seated. Thank you. And we'll see if there's any questions.
Good morning, members. My name's Chris Filbridge. I'm a resident of Boxford and have been asked to speak on behalf of the village. A significant issue with the scheme relates to highways. The lack of empirical testing and local travel patterns not being taken into account. Firstly, the case officer's report is misleading. It suggests the planning inspector's decision in relation to an appeal for 24 houses at Goodlands was dismissed due to existing highway safety and congestion concerns on Swan Street and has been considered. It infers that this is not comparable with the situation in Ellis Street. Unfortunately, this misses the point. If the Sandhill proposal was given consent today, the extra traffic generated would exacerbate the inspected highway concerns for Swan Street. The desired path for journeys to Lavenham, Bury and beyond is up Swan Street. It's simply the most convenient route for villagers. New houses in Boxford would increase the traffic on Swan Street, and I would direct members to paragraph 21 of the inspector's report on that case, which finds that even a minor increase in traffic on that road is unacceptable. The applicant's transport assessment merely provides a screen grab of Google Map travel times, suggesting a journey from Boxford to Bury via Sudbury is 1 minute quicker than the Swan Street route. This is simply not the case, and villagers' preference is to avoid peak time queues at the A1071, A134 junction and elsewhere through Sudbury, especially now that the lower speed limits have been put into place. Secondly, neither the case officer, highways, nor applicant consider the impact of the extra traffic through the narrow pinch point, that is Stone Street for Hamlet, the desired route into Colchester for commuters. The proposal would increase traffic here, and there are regular hold-ups. I know of at least one listed house there, which has been hit twice recently, causing extensive structural damage. Thirdly, the highway's proposal to introduce a pavement on Ellis Street fails to understand local traffic movement and issues which will be worsened by both the changes and the extra traffic generated by the scheme. It will significantly narrow the road on an 80-metre stretch, which is blind at both ends with no refuge. This is compounded by the blind junction at Sandhill and Coxhill, the latter which does not have a pavement, and the steps of number 22 Ellis Street are frequently hit by vehicles. So in summary, members, the highway officer's response has not taken any local knowledge of travel patterns into account and simply takes the applicant's submission as read. Surely, before such a significant decision is taken for the village, we need a reliable approach to understand current and future traffic patterns. The application and analysis before members has not tested travel patterns properly, nor has it listened to local views. Most notably, it ignores the planning inspector precedent vis-à-vis the scheme beyond Swan Street. The application needs to follow due process. The precedent is clear here. Please do not make a folly decision purely on what Google tells us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Jemison.
Hello, morning.
Morning.
You mentioned Swan Street, but the road, is it Cox Hill or Cox Road that goes off to Kersey? How busy is that coming down to the Sandhill junction?
So the reason I mentioned Swan Street is because of the travel journey of villagers to Bury St Edmunds. Yeah. And because of the decision taken on the Goodlands appeal, people will travel along that road. And because the inspector has suggested that any minor change in the traffic movements on that road is unacceptable, I believe that
Due to the 80 houses being built on Sand Hill, people will use that road and will increase the traffic movements on that road above and beyond what the planning inspector has suggested is unacceptable. I do think the applicant has made some attempts to...
I do think you've answered the question that you put forward, thank you. Otherwise, if I allow you to go into too much debate, I've got to allow others, and we can't have that. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anything you wish to comment? I did note misleading and the fact that the inspector's report, perhaps you ought to just emphasise that again, bearing in mind the comments made by the objector.
Of course, thank you, Chair. I think it's for members to consider routes in terms of where residents would potentially drive to or from. And there's no reason to say that residents would not go off to Ipswich or indeed to Sudbury. Yes, it is absolutely, it's a fair point in terms of residents would have that option of driving down Swan Street to Cambridge or Bury, for instance. But I think you need to take that in the round, and that is that there is also access to other key towns. So I'll leave that for now.
Thank you. Of course, there is Colchester as well. Surely Colchester is nearer than Bury, is it not, or do we not know?
It's going to be in a similar sort of catchment and distance. Ultimately, Colchester is accessed via a different route, and members will arrive at their own conclusion on that.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on. The applicants and agent, I don't know, Ed Barrett and David Neal. All right. Mr. Neal is a transport consultant. So between you, you have 3 minutes, and then I'll see if there's any questions for you at the end of it.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Ed Barrett, and I'm the Senior Planning Manager at Catesby Estates, the applicant. In concluding that the proposals before you represent sustainable development, your officers have factored into their balancing exercise the significant benefits which will be delivered. These include the provision of up to 28 much-needed affordable homes. Average house prices in Boxford are currently more than 10 times the average salary in the district, and your officers correctly recognise that the proposed policy-compliant affordable housing weighs heavily in favour of the proposals. To encourage walking to local facilities, the proposals will deliver an extension to the existing footway on Sand Hill, providing a continuous off-carriageway link to the village centre. In addition, the existing footway on the northern side of Broad Street will be widened where there is an identified pinch point. These improvements will also benefit existing residents and school children who currently walk within the carriageway. In response to the comments raised at our public consultation event, the improvements incorporate an enlarged waiting area adjacent to the bus stop at the bottom of Sand Hill to allow school children to wait clear of the road. The surfacing of the existing footpath running between the Station Field development and Brookhall Road will be improved to ensure it provides a good, usable walking connection to the village and for leisure purposes. Importantly, the Highway Authority have confirmed the proposals meet their requirements and will not have a severe impact on highway safety or capacity. The improvement scheme has also been subject to an independent road safety audit, verifying that the proposals constitute a safe and suitable link for pedestrians. I'm joined by our transport consultant, Mr. Neal, who will be happy to answer any questions you may have on the proposals. Responding to local residents' desire for smaller dwellings, 60% of the properties proposed in our master plan are 2 and 3 bedroom in size, including a number of bungalows and maisonettes. The increased choice of new homes will allow growing families and first-time buyers to remain within the village, as well as enabling older residents to downsize. In line with national trends, Boxford is experiencing an increase in the proportion of its population aged over 65, and new working-age residents will make a positive contribution to the sustainability of the village, helping to support local services and facilities. The size of the site will mean that it will have strong interest from local and regional house builders, and its development will assist in bolstering the district's housing supply and delivery record, as it is immediately deliverable. Reflecting our confidence of this, we are committing to an obligation requiring the reserve matters be submitted within 18 months of the grant of an outline and planning permission. In summary, no objections have been received from any technical or environmental consultees. The site is logical, and the proposals before you will set the parameters for a high-quality, sensitive scheme reflective of the character of the village. The benefits of the proposal are considerable, and I ask you to follow your officer's recommendation and vote in favour of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Councillor Osborne first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two questions, really. First of all, just two questions, really, and it involves your representation to the council, to the parish council. Can I be assured that you have been with them on a lot of the objectives that you wish to seek on this application? And secondly, are you likely to continue the design that is on that section of housing just before you come through the gate where we stood for the site visit? Would that be of the same good outlook and design?
We've met with the Parish Council and the Neighbourhood Plan Group and also held a public consultation event in the village, met with residents. And we did make a number of amendments to the proposals following those discussions. It's an outline planning application, so we're not setting the detailed design of the properties. That will be done when a house builder is selected for the site. They will need to submit their details as a reserve matters planning application, which again will be consulted on and discussed with local residents. And they will need to meet the requirements of the local authority in terms of design. So they may not be identical to the adjacent development, hopefully even better. But that will be open for your consideration at that point.
And did you get an answer to the second part of your question? Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, it was in relation to the design, which I overlooked the position that it's only an outline application. But I just wanted to know that he would continue, or the agent would hopefully get the same good design as we've seen already around that site.
That would come back to us in due course anyway. Councillor Norman.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you, thank you very much for, obviously, I think you've circulated this to all members, the document that you sent through with the information regarding to the scheme. I just wanted to query, on here when you talked about the key development features, it mentions a maximum of 80 new homes. Obviously, I'm just wondering, are you expecting that to decrease or come down at all? Obviously, when you say maximum, and if it was to decrease, would that do anything to the proposed affordable housings that you're proposing, or change the makeup of the bedrooms or anything like that?
Yeah, a bit like the answer to the first question, the number of units will depend on the house builder when they purchase a site from us. The maximum is 80. They could go less depending on their layout and how they design the site. The affordable requirement is a pro rata percentage, 35. So yes, if there were less at the reserve matter stage, the affordable would be proportionally lower, but it would still be in line with policy.
Yes, if we were minded to approve it, the maximum would be 80, but there could be less, but either way that would come back to us. Okay. Yeah. Councillor Barrett?
Sorry, this might have already been discussed, I might have missed it, but I just wondered, as the site is sort of rising to the southwest, I think, will you have a plan for a single story being more on the brow of the hill, or have you got to that stage yet?
Yeah, there's a range of detail in the design and access statement that we submitted, and that starts to establish a number of parameters for the site, while not setting the absolute detail. It shows where the built development would sit, with a landscape buffer around the edges of the site, and it'd be nestled down as far as possible into the lower parts of the site. And yet higher properties would be at more sensitive locations. They're not a blanket spread. They would be dotted at particular features on corners of streets, etc., in the right location. And again, that would be the detail that you would be able to consider at the reserve matter stage.
I'll get the planning officer to clarify that point when we go to him in a moment. Thank you. Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask, within the plans, would some of these be homes for life? Because it's very important now that people would move there and want to remain depending how their health.
I'm not sure of the exact local policy on Homes for Life. But if that is part of the core strategy or the new local plan, then yes, the reserve matters would need to be in accordance with that. I think building regulations are sort of overtaking that local policy now and does incorporate some of those requirements.
I'm told, Councillor Ayres, that we cannot give you an answer to that in a moment. I'll come back to you. Any other questions to the applicants and the highway expert there? Consultant, sorry. It's only Suffolk County Council highways have experts. Any other comments? No? Councillor Hinton.
Just one quick question, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned when you were answering Councillor Orman's question about reduction in number of homes, etc., that you would be getting the planning permission and then selling the site on to somebody else to actually develop. Is that correct?
That's correct. Catesby Estates are a land promoter. We don't typically develop homes ourselves, so we would market the site openly to national, regional and local house builders, select a partner who we would then transfer the land to, and they would proceed with reserve matters for the site.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Would you like to comment on what you've just heard?
If I may, yes, Chair. In answer to Councillor Barrett's question concerning what would effectively be landscaping and indeed building heights, yes, the agent is quite right, that would come through a detailed design. However, it's also important to note that the landscaping would be a fundamental feature of the next phase if members are minded to approve. There's nothing before us that would stop us from creating a scheme that would be sensitive in that regard. So that's what we will consider at that point. In terms of Councillor Ayres' question, mix and tenure is fixed. There would be a mix, 75% of affordable rent and 25% shared ownership that would be a district-wide need. In terms of the actual accountability of Homes for Life, that will come through with their advice at the time. What is fixed, obviously, is the percentage figure, and that is 35%, so it would be proportionate relative to the amount that is proposed. If 80 comes through and it's a cramped scheme, we're going to have to look at something that is more acceptable, and that may mean releasing, a few more dwellings to enable space to create a better scheme. So it's up to, for a reason, we do regain that control in terms of the design and the layout proper. I think that answers the design element, and deliverability has been covered off by the agent. And Houses for Life were part of that answer with regards to affordable housing, Chair.
Thank you. And I think it's fair to point out that it's not unusual for applicants, whether they're companies or individuals, to get a planning permission and then they sell it on to somebody else to develop. I think that happens all the time, but it's been pointed out to us, so we are aware of that. Right. I think we've now come to, there's no county councillor, so it's the ward member, Councillor Bryn Harron. You, sir, have 5 minutes in which to address the committee, and perhaps you'd remain and I'll service any questions for you. Thank you.
Chairman, thank you very much. Good morning. And thank you to those who attended the site meeting last Wednesday. On behalf of the people of Boxford, I am very opposed to this application, and I do ask that you turn it down today. This site has been subject of planning speculation before. There have been 3 attempts to put it into the call for site, the SLUR as we would know it, and it has been rejected every time, including about 18 months ago. It has also been considered by the Boxford Neighbourhood Plan team, and it's considered unsuitable and undeliverable, mainly through poor connectivity to the village. I would ask Jack, could you put slide 5 or 11 up on the screen, please, if that's possible? The application, it states and talks about Weavers Green. I would say there's no such place as Weavers Green. I wanted the slide up so that you could see what we're actually considering building on. It's a very, very beautiful area with rolling fields, which are part of Boxford. And it's close to the AONB, and I think more attention should be given to this site for its actual merit. It's a very, very beautiful piece of rolling farmland, and it's not an ideal place to build. It's also close to the AONB, as already mentioned. Weavers Green is a name that the applicant has attached to this. It's actually Station Field because it's where the old police station was in Boxford, and why the development that's the local needs at the bottom that's so lovely was called Station Field. Weavers Green is an oddity, really. They give it a pretty name before they cover the whole lot with concrete, and I would ask members just to help us to preserve this site. The school has been mentioned. It has some capacity in the later years because lots of people start off in Boxford School and then they take them out maybe for a private school or they just move away. So we do have spaces in the later years, but the in the lower years, year one, it's actually full, and we've had appeals which have been turned down, and local people have been refused, which is very sad. I note with interest the County Council's own summary where they say that it probably won't be possible for children off this site, should it be built, to go to Boxford School. They would be bussed out to Stoke-by-Nayland, which, as it's just under the 3 miles, under the new County Council policy, would not be free transport. People from Boxford would have to pay £250 a term for their child to go out of the area to another school, and I think that is a serious consideration. There's also the issue of the surgery, which is basically one room divided into 4. Very little capacity there. We are linked to the main surgery at Hadley, but once again, that's 6 miles away, so it's yet more travel. We need a bigger surgery desperately for the houses we've got, but there is very little chance on that because, like the school, it is landlocked. So once again, it's development without infrastructure, and this will be a problem. The affordable housing gets many mentioned, and there's talk about the local need. And yes, we do have a local need in Boxford. It's in the 20s, which is why we've built in the past nearly 50 affordable homes, and we probably do need 22 more. But I must stress the homes provided with this application are not local. They will not probably go to Boxford people. They are general needs, which means we will suck more people in from across the district and other district to the North Norfolk down to Essex. So I do stress this point. This homes predicted will probably do nothing whatsoever for Boxford's local needs. We've all seen and read the Elizabeth Thomas letter, and my God, didn't she get it right? And I think I'm surprised that after that, this application then came forward for approval at this committee. Sequentially, I feel, and in Boxford, we've always tried to build on the poorer land. And in this case of Sand Hill, the field continues to run to the River Box, where the land there is much poorer. You only have to look at the crops to see that that is the case, and that would be the preferred site for Boxford. I am coming...
Thank you, Councillor Harron. You're well over your time, so
okay,
we'll
thank you, Chairman.
finish it there. Thank you. Members, is there any questions you wish to... Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Councillor Hurren, whereabouts relative to this site is the primary school and the doctor's surgery and the shops?
piece of Stone Street.
If I can just interject, obviously we have the application site here. As you walk round, slight U shape. Are we able to dim the lights quickly? Sorry. So in effect, you have the access through here, and the school is just on the upslope from the river at this point here. And the doctor's is over the other side of the road, close by.
Is it not possible, Jack, to bring up the plan of the village?
No, we haven't got that. We've only got that one.
No, I think this is all we've got, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, the...
Anyway, actually now answer the question.
Yes. Yeah, the surgery, John, is at the back of the village, at the bottom of Swan Street, behind the post office, if you know Boxford at all, down a little lane. And the school is in, as you go down the bypass, Stone Street is cut in half, and the school is in the cut-off piece from the bypass. So it's quite a journey around. I hope that's helpful.
Councillor Hinton, you've got another question?
Yeah. According to the MPPF, facilities have to be, or ideally should be, within 800 metres for walking distance to facilities, so that's schools, doctors, shops. How far would you estimate it is from the main entrance to this site or from the rear entrance via...
Councillor Hinton, people are struggling to hear you. Can you get nearer to your mic?
According to the MPPF, ideally walking distance is 800 metres. How far would you say that the doctors, the school and the shops are from both the main entrance to this site and to the back entrance, if you like, via the public rights of way or permissive rights of way, whatever they are?
I would estimate, Councillor Hinton, they are probably coming off Sand Hill. I would think it's about 200 to 300 metres down to Sand Hill, probably about 4 down to the village. You probably just about get to the doctor's surgery within 8. I think the school is probably another 100 metres around, and probably just over would be my best guesstimation. I walk it many times, but I'm a quick walker.
Thank you. Can you help on that? What Councillor Hinton was referring to, I think we need...
If the councillor could remind me of the paragraph number, I'll have a quick look. So I think there are different references to different types of settlement. Okay.
Right. You can answer or help, okay?
I think that's a worthwhile point in terms of the distances. If you look at the Chartered Institute for Transport, they provide a staggered test, if you like, 500 metres being desirable, 1,000 metres being acceptable, and 1,500 metres being considered. Members will make their own minds up on whether this is within those parameters, but certainly the MPPF does provide connectivity, and the paragraph is there for that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hurren, you've openly stated that you oppose this application, and you've urged us as decision takers to do likewise. Obviously, you know, as decision takers, if members were minded to do as you have suggested, and if members were minded to refuse this application, we have to do so on planning grounds. Now, you've quite rightly explained to us your reservations about this application. So I would imagine that you have given mind to the specific recommendations or the specific policies that would enable this committee to do likewise. So have you, on what specific planning grounds do you oppose this application?
I think the main thing, Councillor Parker, is the traffic issues, the pinch point coming down Ella Street. I don't think it fulfills what it should do at that point by a long way. The inspector's report mentioned the dangers to pedestrians in Swan
I
Street.
think, in fairness, Councillor Howard, you already highlighted the dangers. I think Councillor Parker wanted to know reasons or policies, and I think you've got that you've got one on highways.
I think also the sequentially of where you build, building on the poorest land. I don't think it fulfils that also, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a fair comment. Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed there's a bus stop at the bottom of Sand Hill. What is the bus service like in Boxford? Is there an alternative to using cars out of the village?
There is a bus service, Councillor Jameson, that recently has been cut. One of the main problems is getting children to school. We mainly feed a school for Thomas Gainsborough. But because of the county council changes, that is also changed, and there is going to be more reliance on the private car. The problem with Boxford is it's so narrow roads all through it that it's badly beginning to affect the shops and things. It's getting impossible to stop, to buy a paper, to buy your meat and things like that. We are just clogged with cars totally now, and it's becoming the overriding issue.
Thank you. Councillor Plum.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. That brings me to my question. This extra transport for children, school transport, to Stoke Island, would that be going up Swan Street?
No, that would not from the new site, no. That would have access onto the 1071, I would imagine. But some of the other, now, due to the change policy, it does come down and go up Swan Street. That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Barrett.
Yes, there are a lot of concerns, obviously, about the road traffic, but obviously in Boxford itself, it is purely local traffic, really, isn't it? Because you've got a bypass. You're very fortunate in that you've got a bypass. So surely it's quite slow-moving traffic that is mostly visiting a location within the village and not passing through.
No, that's not quite right, Councillor Barrett. Boxford is on the sort of the highway west for Bury and places like that. Stowmarket, Bilderston. It tends to come down Swan Street. We've monitored Swan Street several times, and it's getting more and more and more, and people do use it as a cut through. I think it's one thing you notice about Swan Street and Ellis Street. I would say 25% of the journeys are with two wheels on a pavement, one side or the other. They are narrow streets. If this goes ahead, we will make Ellis Street even narrower. And I do not see, from measuring it and pacing it, how we would even get a lorry up and down it. And if you build a pavement, it'll just be used as the highway, same as Swan Street is. We suffer from a lot of through traffic, especially in the last few years, which is increasing, I'm afraid.
Councillor Howard, I've been very patient to allow you to go on a bit on the answer. Any other questions? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. So given the answer to your last question, Councillor Howard, is it just this development that you would be opposed to, or surely the answer to your question rules out any development in the village of Boxford?
No, Councillor Parker, that's not right. We would have no problem finding places to put 50 houses in Boxford, but our criteria, it has to provide infrastructure. Our preferred site would provide a footpath over the river down to the school.
Councillor Howard, I'm going to stop you there. And Councillor Parker, I think we have to deal with what's in front of us, not what you think might be or in the future. Okay. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much then, Councillor Howard. You're going to remain there, or do you got to... If
it's permissible, I'll sit here, yeah?
Okay.
I'm a part.
Yeah. You won't take part anymore in that. No, thank you. Right. Jack, is there anything you wish to comment on what you've just heard? Okay, thank you. Members, it's over to you then. Who'd like to start? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I've got a number of questions actually, but perhaps I'll just come out in. Sorry, start at the beginning. Right. Okay. So at the beginning, then, with the tabled papers, with respect to this particular agenda, paragraphs 21.2 to 21.3 should be deleted, which is interesting because when I was reading the report at the weekend, I did actually make specific notes of paragraphs 21.2 to 21.6. So we don't have an explanation as to why that has been deleted.
That first. Okay, can you answer that?
The reason why those paragraphs are now deleted is because that appeal was quashed in the court. The Wingerworth case, which follows, i.e. 21.5, is still active and does still provide context in terms of developments which are edge of settlement with a land supply, which is as per the case here. So that is a materially consistent case, which is worth noting.
Thank you. Your next question.
Well, can I come back on that point then, Chair? Because one of the points I wrote down over the weekend when I was reading this is that the recommendation for the application here, a significant part of the recommendation is precisely paragraphs 21.2 to 21.6, and what those relate to are appeal decisions elsewhere. And so what it occurred to me was that we were being asked to do here was to say, well, or that the implication of these paragraphs is that, well, actually, it's going to be really difficult to turn this application down because of appeals elsewhere. And that seems to have a little bit of an arm up the back scenario for us as decision takers here. So I'm interested to learn that actually 21.2 and 21.3 have been, or the appeal for that has been quashed. I don't really have a point to that other than just the fact that it is just a statement, Chair, that it does sort of take out a large proportion of the reason as to why we might recommend approval on this.
I think it's an entirely accurate and fair comment. We do still have to take consideration to precedent from the courts and indeed appeals. And the Wingerworth case is prevalent. That was issued by a very senior inspector, Mr. Philip Ware, and that concluded that edge of settlement and indeed whether a LPA does have a sufficient housing land supply. It's not a ceiling height. 5 years isn't the ceiling height. It's whether the site is deliverable and indeed whether, in light of all material considerations, whether the site is sustainably located. For instance, this is the formed basis of your recommendation. The principle of development, yes, I think your officers do recognise that there is a degree of tension with CS2, heightened by the fact that there is currently a land supply. But the general drive and boost from government is that we need to provide homes, and the MPPF is clear in that. We still need to provide drip feed. We can't turn the tap off completely. At the same time, it can't be on full blast. And forgive me for that analogy, but I think that summarises where we need to be in terms of retaining and maintaining a land supply. Yes, there is conflict with CS2, if you're minded to look at that, but at the same time, your officers feel that the connectivity, as demonstrated, is sufficient along with the infrastructure, and the principle being located edge of settlement on balance, and it is a fine balance because there are lots of for and against arguments here, is on balance acceptable, and that's where the basis of the recommendation is formed.
Thank you. You've got a full answer there, Councillor Parker. Any other points? No? Councillor Jemison?
Jack, you say the infrastructure is there, yet we haven't got enough places in the schools. We've got to ship out to Stoke-on-Ayland. There's not enough space in the doctors, and the roads are all narrow. I mean, is this a case of building more properties without the infrastructure in the village to accommodate?
And again, as part of the balancing exercise, which you will no doubt make, I do concur with those comments to a degree. I think what is important is there is provision in terms of a footpath that we would secure, and in the same way we would secure a contribution for transport in terms of getting kids to school. That is the only feasible option given that the County Council have a requirement and duty to provide school places for children of Boxford and surrounding areas. There's no capacity at that school. That's recognised, whether you're providing one dwelling or thousands. That school cannot be expanded. It is constrained heavily. Now, you have to look at elsewhere. Can they be, in essence, transported elsewhere? You have Hadley High School, you have the Thomas Gainsborough in Sudbury in terms of high school provision, and you also have Stoke-on-Ayland, as cited in the report. So this is the best option available for the short term.
Thank you. Thomas Gainsborough is in Great Cornard.
Apologies, Chair.
That's all right. Sudbury can't take credit for Thomas Gainsborough, Great Cornard does. Councillor Plum, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. We've had some good idea of how you're going to get down Sand Hill with a pedestrian into the village, but now can we look at the other side of the site? I don't know if we can get the map up, but you've got a right-of-way going through the field that more or less splits the site in half. There it is. And then you've got access into the village there. How is that access into the village from... Whoa. You're all right with the first one? No, it's... If you go back one or two... Go back. Now, there. The footpath goes to the middle of the site, and then how does that access the village?
So on the definitive map, it shows as there being a link from the agricultural land as present to what would in essence be like a T-junction for the pedestrian here. You can then traverse along west to an access onto Cox Hill and down.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, so eventually it ends up on Cox Hill. Yeah, and so to get to services in the village, they then have to go down Cox Hill.
That they would have that option. Yes, there's a public right-of-way which links off. Residents would have that option of traversing, in essence, down Cox Hill to where the bus stop would be, and is. Similarly, you'd also have the option along the south, as we've been through.
Okay, so we've got the way. So we're talking about a lot of the pedestrians are going to be coming down Cox Hill, which is unpaved in many parts, particularly at the junction with the main road into the village. Okay, that's fine. That's just you piloted it for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Can you put the votes? Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'll come back to Councillor Jameson's point with regards to school places, if I may, Chair, sorry. Because Boxford is the catchment school, Boxford Primary School is the catchment school for also Newton, Edwardson, Assington and Groton, as well as Boxford. So by natural extension, therefore, this proposed development would have knock-on effects for the children from all of those villages as well, which would have an unfortunate knock-on effect with Suffolk County Council's transport policy. How material is that factor to our decision-making process?
I think in terms of the cumulative effect, again, it's a worthwhile point. The Development Contributions Manager has offered their advice with regards to what could realistically be achieved, because you have to remember that we have to provide school places, not just for Boxford, but the surrounding areas, as you've quite rightly pointed. Now, what that comes down to is another school going to be built? And in this instance, no, not at this point in time. There is every chance that could happen in the future. Where and how that's delivered is unfortunately not within our jurisdiction. We can only go off of the advice, which is a short-term fix over a period of 7 years in a monetary contribution to deliver accessibility for children of the site to access schools. If that means that they go over into different parishes or different schools, that's part of the overall consideration. Yes, it is material in answer to your question, and it does have tension with that element of the policy. But we have to deliver schools, and that catchment does provide that.
Thank you. Any other comments, members? Councillor Bass.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just sort of thinking about the traffic generated through the village, and much of what we heard is about the potential problem caused on this site for traffic heading north through using Swan Street. But we have to really think about, is this really credible that this is an alternative that people would actually choose from the proposed site, where they're very near to the Boxford bypass, where they could access very easily, or would they choose to go through Swan Street, that we've heard is a very difficult street where you have to stop and pull over and allow other passing cars. So I don't believe that rational people would choose that route. They would prefer to get onto the road that's the nearest to their house, onto the bypass, which is very lucky to have, and then go towards whichever direction, Colchester or north to Bury. And we've heard a lot about the traffic heading north to Newmarket, Bury St Edmunds and so on, but eventually those vehicles would join a major road, and so they would logically go onto the Boxford bypass. So I really do struggle with that aspect of what we've heard today, and for that reason, that is something I wouldn't be able to consider if I was then minded to consider refusal. On the school places, I know from my experience that these small rural villages really are quite vulnerable to school places not being taken up. And I mean, I have experience of Monks Ely closing, which was affiliated to Boxford, in fact. So I'm and especially in view of the fact that they've got 17 pupils at an out-of-catchment school from Stoke-on-Avon currently, is what I understand. It implies to me that in time we will move to a position where those places should be offered to families in the village, and that will reduce the congestion of those parents driving from Stoke-on-Avon and actually clogging up the streets nearby the school at the other end of the village. Away from this site, so there's quite a balance here. But on the traffic and highways issue, I'm leaning towards approval. On the school places, I'm leaning towards approval. I'd just like to check with anyone who knows. Do we know if the health centre is actually accepting new registrations for people to register there?
Can you help on that at all?
I haven't got that information to hand. I'm wondering if we can quickly check and get back to you if we may.
We'll find that answer for you as quickly as possible, but we'll continue. Is there any other questions? Any other debate? Any other comments? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I completely concur with Councillor Barrett on this one. I find it very strange that the 1071 won't be used, or the A134, which goes either way, Bury, Colchester, Ipswich, Hadley even. So, I agree absolutely with that. The other aspect is the position of affordable housing. Now, over the years, I know the ward member has always put forward needing the area within Boxford for local residents. And I find it strange to believe that you've got 28 affordable housing. Don't forget, there's 110 requirement additional houses per year within the district. And I'm sure that, and we've talked about this in other committees, in that is that the amount of affordable housing for the district should be tended for the district. And therefore areas of people coming in from Essex and surrounding districts outside Suffolk or Baber district in particular would be looked at, and I'm sure by condition that could be put in on these affordable housing. And so therefore I've always been for affordable housing, and therefore I feel that you have 28 affordable houses again, which according to our ward member, he requires 22 of those. So, you know, once again now, I can't find myself supporting a refusal on this application.
Thank you. Did you hear the comments about affordable housing? You did, right? And I'll come back to you in a moment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've just confirmed with the Strategic Housing Officer that there would be a cascade allocation within the 106 for that. So the first priority would be for people in the Boxford cluster, i.e. Boxford and the surrounding villages, Groton, Edwardstone, etc. And then would be available to people with a Baber connection after that.
Thank you. Can you help on the other question, or is you are?
In terms of accessibility to the health centre, we can't obtain that information, I'm afraid. Again, I think this is a link with Hadley Health Centre, the Boxford Group Practice, through local knowledge. I can't give you that answer today, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Well, I think we're all aware of the pressures on the health servers, on doctors, on schools and what have you, so I think you'll have to weigh that up, members, yourselves. Any other comments? Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Been looking at the provisions of CS11. Now, whilst I accept Boxford's a core village, and therefore the hinterland criteria do not apply, looking at the locally identified need for housing and employment and specific local needs such as affordable housing and local identified community needs. Have we seen any of that for this application, and where is the employment? I note it states in the report that there will be some employment during the construction phase, but for whom? Is there a sudden influx of building workers in Boxford who suddenly need employment? No, they will be coming in from round and about the area, probably the county even. So we'll end up with a lot of traffic. Once the homes are built and occupied, where are those people going to work? Not in Boxford, because nobody's supplying any employment in Boxford. So they're going to get in the car and go somewhere else. Now, we've had motions before full council to declare climate emergencies and to develop a climate responsible action, and the government's even talking about zero carbon by 2050. We're never going to get to it if we keep building in the middle of the countryside with no employment and no sustainable activity within those villages. People are going to have to get in a car and go. So where is the employment provision from this application, and also the locally identified community need as it states in CS11?
Can you answer anything about that?
I have a health centre answer first. Whilst that was,
right. We'll do the health centre.
Yes, the website wasn't working. It's given. It doesn't break down between Boxford and Hadley, unfortunately. It's called the Hadley Boxford Group Practice. So that isn't 100% helpful, but it does confirm. Provided you live in the practice area, you are able to register at the practice. So you may register at the Hadley and Boxford group, not specifically just Boxford.
Right. Thank you. Now, the question to you, I think, was on jobs and workers and future.
Of course, thank you, Chair. I think in terms of the economic gain, certainly during the build phase, there would be an influx of development and indeed jobs created as a result of the proposal. The spending power that goes with that, not just at the time of development, but also from residents of the site upon the village is going to be a benefit, certainly for the local economy. The New Anglia Strategic Economic Plan acknowledges that there would be support created from 1.5 jobs to every increase. So in effect, creating jobs through development would have a knock-on effect locally, and that can only be a benefit. I think in terms of employment, people need places, yes, to work, and certainly providing homes where people can live would help assist with that. So there's no reason to believe that it would not enable settlement for residents who wish to work nearby. Now, economic provision is provided. In terms of the employment side, that would be limited, I think, in terms of what the site delivers as a whole once built out, because employment is not part of the proposal. So that's all that I can really say on that aspect, and I trust that you'll consider the spending power that is engaged. In terms of the affordables, we've spoken about that at length. That is a community benefit in a way. In terms of community benefits, such as a building, that's not part of the proposal, I'm afraid. I think what we need to look at is whether it is within context of CS11, and your officers consider that it is, with regards to the needs of the village, both locally and in terms of the district-wide. There was a local housing need assessment submitted that does adequately find provision, and I believe Councillor Hurren's confirmed that there is surplus need. So there is a deficit that this scheme would fill, partly. So I think we need to consider that both from the affordables and from the economic improvement locally.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to talk about employment opportunities locally, because it's very interesting that in very near vicinity to Boxford, you've got Connings fruit operation, which employs 90 people. We've only just approved a change to their planning, so we are all quite familiar with that site and what jobs are on offer, and so that's very viable for the houses on this side of Boxford. They're even closer. There's also the Stoke Bonayland Hotel that I think, Ms. Bryn, you attended a meeting with me and with the hotel recently, didn't we? And we heard about their plans and their actual needs are for about 500 employees in total across all their businesses. And in fact, they do have problems with recruiting because of the lack of housing. And that was actually raised with us as councillors in this ward only this year. So, yeah, I'm quite passionate about this, because I think there is a very real employment prospects very near to this site.
Thank you. Any other comments, members? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so one item that we haven't touched upon yet, which for me is absolutely fundamental, and that is the apparent contradiction between the recommendation in the proposal, in the application, but our own planning policy officer's objection. And that concerns me greatly, that we there doesn't seem to have been any mention of it, and actually our own planning policy is quite scathing of this proposal. The very last line says, it is unclear how deliverable the site will actually be, and that the site is speculative and no certainty of likely annual build-out of rates. Boxford is not the most sustainable settlement when considered as a geographical whole across the district for major growth. So, the paragraph is on page 9 and over on page 10. So we have our planning policy team who write the very policies that we use to determine our own applications, who is opposed to this application. Can I have some... Yep. And I've got a secondary question after I've had this response, if that's all right, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. I think the policy comments expressed are in mind in terms of our overall balance. We have to recognise the policy that is engaged, and that is CS2. There's going to be conflict with CS2, naturally, because the development is technically located in the countryside. So there'll always be a degree of conflict in that regard, and that's heightened by the land supply position. So officers do recognise that. We also have CS11, edge of settlement, subject to the criteria test, which we've been through, and officers consider that it is acceptable, is material. Now, if I may, I'd like to go through a couple of aspects that are mentioned here, because it's been broken down into what is essentially 3 paragraphs by the Planning Policy Officer. In relation to connectivity and port access to services and facilities, which is in the first paragraph, your officers consider that you can walk to the centre of the village. There's good footpath provision. A few lines down it states no pedestrian footpath along Sand Hill. Your officers consider that there is, both in terms of existing and what is proposed through the section 106 to be linked up. That paragraph is summarised. This would need further advice from the Highways Authority. We've been to the Highways Authority and discussed it with them. They raised no objection. The next paragraph, Boxford is not the most sustainable settlement when considered as a geographical whole. Sorry, you've already cited that line. Your officers do agree, in a sense, when you consider it against towns such as Sudbury or Hadley. It's on the next peg down sequentially. Ideally, we'd develop in towns, Sudbury, Hadley, as a policy measure. The next peg down is core villages, for which Boxford is one, then it's Hinterland, and so on. Sequential preference. So we have considered that. And in terms of, whether it would require, future occupiers to travel by car, there are services and facilities available. There are bus links. Residents would have the option, and that's what we are providing. So I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on that, and sorry, I won't bore you much longer. The advice taken with regards to the ecology is also material, as is the flood and water comments. No objections have been raised with regards to ecology or flood and water, and it is considered. Deliverability, we've taken the opportunity to impose an 18-month time limit on the reserve matters submission. So we, as officers, would want submission of reserve matters within 18 months. Typically, we go with 3 years, but this is deliverable. And there's a proven track record through the agent that's demonstrated in their planning statement that outlines the deliverability of the company and also the site. And that's why we've imposed an 18-month condition.
Thank you. Once again, Councillor Parker has given you a full answer there, which hopefully is helpful and to members. Any other? You've got a second question, or has he picked it up?
Well, I will ask it, Chair, all the same. I mean, it was mentioned, and that's just with regards to our planning officer team saying there is surface water flooding towards the northern part of the site, which appears to be contradictory to paragraph 14 on page 27 that says the site is not located in a vulnerable flood zone area. Therefore, the risk of flooding is considered to be low. So there appears to be a contradiction there.
We'll get you an answer, Councillor Parker.
Thank you for your question. So in essence, the flood zone is depicted by the blue extent. The site is not located in a concerning flood zone 2 or 3. The site is not susceptible to flood risk when you compare it against the Environment Agency modelling. Nonetheless, this does not negate the need to provide surface water drainage provision. Infiltration tests have been carried out. The site is readily capable of accommodating the flood drainage measures required, and there's lots of different modern techniques used. So there's no reason to believe that a site could not come forward with adequate drainage provision. Remember the indicative layout, which I should have somewhere, shows a basin. This is indicative. So if it was to be cited elsewhere, we would deal with that at reserve matters. But again, it's a worthwhile point that I trust is clear.
Thank you. Thanks. Members, any new points or questions or no? Barrett.
Perhaps I could suggest that we vote on approval of the application. Outline application.
Proposing that we approve in accordance with the officer's recommendation.
I'm glad you put the words there rather than me. Thank you. Would you like to start again?
Can I suggest that we approve this application for outline planning permission?
Okay.
That's in accordance with the officer's recommendation, and we've not had any additional conditions suggested during the debate. I've not noted any. I don't think that, no.
Let me be clear. Are you proposing that we accept the officer's recommendation that's detailed in front of us on our papers?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Osborne, do you wish to make any comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I gladly second this application as per the officer's recommendation. I do understand the position within the traffic congestion in Swan Street. When that particular application came forward, I was against it. But I cannot see any reason for that if the highways are going to intend to do further works just in front of Swan Street and possibly do something with Swan Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, members, unless there's any new questions or factors that you want brought up, I'm going to put this to the members. No? Right. I've had a recommendation from Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Osborne, to accept the officer's recommendations as outlined in your papers for approval. All those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That falls.
Yeah. That is lost. So I now have to ask those members if they've got a proposal for refusal to put it.
Yeah, Chairman, just to make absolutely clear with everyone in the room, because this, again, we've got people who may not be familiar with the planning process. The vote that we've had just means there is no authority to give permission. If members wish to refuse, then there must be a proposal to refuse with reasons for refusal.
So I'm going to ask you, do you have a proposal for refusal with reasons, please? Failure to give me one, I will use my powers to defer it. And then, right, good. Councillor Parker.
Right, super job, Chair. So we're back here again, aren't we? And this relates back to what I was saying earlier about, a little bit of arm up the back, unfortunately, because we now have to find a comprehensive planning reason to refuse. But I think it's there, Chair. Yep, absolutely. So I do think it's there. For me, it is a finely balanced application, this, and I do acknowledge that, and that's always the problem in a committee situation. You've got to make a decision ultimately at the end, and you've got to think fast on your feet sometimes. But for me, there's just too many question marks around this application, Chair, to be honest, that haven't been squared away. So for me, I think the schools issue is a major issue. So, we're talking about infrastructure there, etc. Anyway, I'm sort of filling time hoping that my colleagues are manfully looking through the policy document.
I'm going to have to push you for your reasons.
So, Chair, I would like to propose refusal of the officer's recommendation on policy basis CS2, CS11 and CS15. I don't know if any of my... CS15, obviously the policy states that the applications or any application must respect the landscape features, streetscape, etc. So I don't believe that it does that. Does it make a positive contribution to local character? Paragraph 3, protect or create jobs and sites to strengthen or diversify the local economy. It doesn't evidence that. Paragraph 4, ensure, and I think that's a key word, ensure an appropriate level of services, facilities and infrastructure. It doesn't seek to do that. I'm off and running now, Chair.
You're doing well. We've got paragraphs 3 and 4. We're up with you there. Right, carry on.
I would say paragraph 5, in terms of enhancing local services and facilities and indeed rural communities, because coming back to the schools aspect, there is a knock-on effect for rural communities outside. So paragraph 5. Paragraph 8 potentially as well addresses climate change through design adaptation. Well, we don't know because of course it's not, but paragraph 8 potentially.
We've got CS11, CS2, CS15, which was landscape, paragraphs 3, 4 and 5. 5 was local services. I've forgotten what 3 and 4 was, but the officers will find them out. And you're using paragraph 8. As backup.
So those would be my reasons for refusal of the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Very helpful. Have you got all them down? No. Right. Did you wish to comment on any of
Could you confirm? Sorry.
Hang on.
Yeah. Could you confirm? So CS2, as in the broad principle of it being outside a built-up area boundary, and then CS11. I think you said 5, which is community needs. Is that right?
Yes, it would be.
Okay. Did you mention CS1 as well, which is the landscape character, etc.?
Have we had CS15?
Yeah, it sort of does duplicate a bit.
Yeah, we had all 3 mentioned.
We're told it's point 1 of CS11.
CS11.1, yeah.
Which would
And then
take out
5.
CS15, is that right?
Well, let's have a look at. Well, there's some specific paragraphs in CS15, Councillor, that you're considering beside the landscape one, which is covered by CS11.
Sorry, I'm not entirely sure of the question, Chair, because I've just listed all of the relative paragraphs.
If you could clarify the limb of CS15 that you feel the application should be refused for, just so we're clear of the reason. Which ones have you got?
We need clarity.
A lot came through, councillors, just to check we've recorded it properly. I'm sure they were said, but if we could just be sure.
In that case, Chair, can we do it the other way around and you just repeat back what I said in that case? And then I can clarify.
Can you tell us what we've got?
So we've got CS2.
Yep.
CS11,
yep.
Limb 1 and Limb 5 in terms of community needs and landscape on those 2 strikes. And I think that was it. And 4.
Yep.
So limbs 1, 4 and 5 of CS11, along with CS2 as we mentioned. And I believe that's it.
That's enough.
CS15 as well.
Okay, so do you want me to reel off again?
Well, I think I recorded 3, 4, 5 and 8, was it?
Yeah, paragraphs they were.
Paragraphs, yeah, 3, 4, 5 and 8.
That's correct.
Okay.
3, 4, 5 and 8. Yeah. Right, so we've got all that.
Yeah, I did put 2 in there as well, para 2 in CS15 as well.
Para 2 of CS15.
CS15, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8.
Right, we're just going to read these out so that we're sure. Councillor Parker, can you just read out what you've got there?
Okay, so we have CS2, CS11 paragraphs or limbs 1, 5 and 4 and 5, 1, 4 and 5. And CS15 we have 2, 3, 4, 5 and 8.
2, 3, 4, 5 and 8.
Just to be clear to members of the public, so that you're not totally confused, the reason that we've had to insist from Councillor Parker to put forward the reasons for his refusal, which I'll take a vote on in a moment, is that if he's successful in that, then these are the arguments that the officers feel they can argue if the applicant takes us to appeal. So that is why we have to be clear on it. And that's the strongest ones that Councillor Parker can find in the policies in front of us.
Councillor, it's a bit, sorry, Chair, it's a little tedious, but if I could just let people know what those
Yes?
Yes, I think it's
paragraphs
important that you do. isn't it?
cover. So I'm on CS15, so I'll start there. You cited 2, which is making a positive contribution to local character. 3, which is protect or create jobs to strengthen or diversify the local economy. You're saying it would fail on that. 4, which is ensure an appropriate level of services, etc. And 5, which is retain, protect or enhance local services. And then 8, which is address climate change. I think of those, if I may say 4, I wouldn't hang the school thing off that. The County Council, as statutory provider of education, hasn't got an objection to what's being proposed. There's a solution there to that. There would be places in time in Boxford School and certainly other surrounding schools. So if we are going with 4, I would ask that that didn't include any reference to schooling.
Mr. Chairman, if I could interject there, the only problem with that, of course, is that it then effectively makes the paragraph 8, where addressing climate change, etc., contradictory to the schools one, because they're going to bus them to somewhere else, which is hardly complying with paragraph 8.
Good point.
Yeah, I don't want to become involved in a debate because obviously you're the elected members, but I think obviously that the narrative within the report was that there are some children outside of Boxford who go to the school, and over time they would be displaced by local children. So it may be argued that there would be less travel. We don't know.
Councillor Parker, do you want to keep that in or not? I think that's the bottom line.
Chair, on balance, yes, I would like to keep it in, yes.
We'll keep that in.
Thank you. So that was CS15. I'll now go to CS11, just to confirm that we're talking about the right paragraphs there. This is just so that we know what we're saying in the case of an appeal, so we're exactly clear. It does help. Okay, so CS11, paragraph 1, refers to landscape, environmental and heritage characteristics of the village, so that's clear enough. 4, because we put the wrong one. 4 is locally identified need, housing and employment, and specific local needs such as affordable housing. I've given an answer on that there is a mechanism for the affordable to be focused on the cluster. I just have to make that point again. If members still wish to go with that reason, then so be it.
Do you wish to keep that one in, Councillor Parker?
The rest of it is
I'll take the officer's advice on that one, Chair. I accept what the officer's saying on that one.
So we'll remove that one. Okay, carry on.
Mr. Chairman, the only bit that the officer is saying is perhaps weak on that particular point is the affordable housing. What about the open market housing and the employment, which is an integral part of that whole paragraph?
That's correct. It's the element that related to affordable housing. I think if and when we craft the refusal, we'll have to make sure we're not saying that it refers to the affordable housing.
Yeah. We're clarifying it to get as strong a case as we can get for you.
And the last point was locally identified community needs. Okay.
You're happy with that? Yeah. And right, and you're now happy with all them, right? Good. Right. I think we got to the situation where I can now put this.
We don't have a seconder yet.
No, which I'm going to do. Which I can now go for a seconder. You've heard all the reasons put forward by Councillor Parker. We've got them wrote down. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Hinton, do you wish to make comment only on that?
I think enough has been said, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good. I have to ask, is there any other new relevant points anybody wish to bring up at this stage? No? I have a proposal for refusal, proposed by Councillor Parker, seconded by Councillor Hinton. All those in favour of refusing this item 6A, please show. Those against? 4. That is carried. This item is refused. Members, we'll have a 10-minute break, comfort break. Please be back by 20 to 12. And we're on page 37. And Elizabeth Flood's the case officer. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So this is an application, an outline application for 25 dwellings with layout and access sought at this time. So this is the site. As you can see, it is the entire edge of the field. You can just see, so this is the existing 1970s Wheatfield estate. The built-up area boundary at the moment goes along the edge of the road, along Wheatfields here. The other thing you won't quite see on this map, but just beyond here is the Grade 2 listed, the Barnard's Hall. And you should also note the school and the village hall are in this location here. Again, the aerial photograph. In your report, you'll note that there was an application in 2015 for a slightly smaller scheme, and this was located in sort of the top half of the site up here. That was for 15 dwellings up here. You'll also note on here the existing estate, and then leading on to the rest of the village along Watfield Road, and the school and the village hall in this location. Okay, so key issues are relating to policy, which the key policies are CS2, CS11 and CS15, which you'll all be familiar with, and the paragraphs 3.14 to 3.39 set out the compliance with CS11 within your report. You will note that a housing survey has been done, and it did consider that there was some need for more housing within the village. Second key issue is the issue of sustainability. Watfield has limited services within the village. It's got a primary school, a village hall and some churches, but there is no shops or employment land, so it is heavily reliant on private vehicles, and it is considered as an unsustainable location. The third key issue is the impact of the character of the village and countryside. There is some impact on the landscape, although it is considered that there are some benefits also in terms of providing some increased landscaping, but overall it's considered that the disbenefits of bringing more development along the edge of the village discounts any potential benefits of a better landscaping scheme, and you'll see that in the photos. And then the third issue is related to the footway proposals for the village school, and I'll point that out on the photographs. And just so you're aware, in the late papers there's a couple of things from flooding. So the applicant has provided a bit more information on why they can't do a full SUDS system, and our flood and water management officer has come back to say it's up to the planning authority to decide if the viability statement does provide sufficient reason for the hybrid SUDS. It's my opinion that it does, and therefore we're not looking at another reason for refusal that it isn't a full SUDS system. So this is the site layout, proposing 25 dwellings with 8 affordable in 2 locations up here and up here, and it's quite a low density scheme with plenty of landscaping, and the applicant has agreed that if you were minded to approve it, they would be happy to approve the schedule of housing, so that the numbers, in terms of house numbers, house sizes, could be agreed at this point. And you'll also notice the proposed boundary treatment to the edge of the field here. Again, this just provides a bit more information on the proposed landscaping. So you can see that there is some existing landscaping in this location already, which you saw on site, and it's proposed to increase the landscaping along here, but also to put in a thick boundary hedge and some mature some trees along this boundary. And there's also some landscaping at the front in line with the existing landscaping, which is on that corner of the field as it is. And you'll note the roads in and out. So it's proposing various roads in and then sort of pedestrian access between, and also an access along here for pedestrians to this footpath up here. Okay, so it's not particularly clear, but this is to provide the indicative boundary elevations to give you an idea of how the landscaping would change. So at the moment, this is the existing wheat fields site. So you can see that there are some trees, but it's not heavily landscaped. And the proposal is to obviously put the new development in, but then have more landscaping on the edge of the field boundary. Clearly, some of this will take time to mature, so the larger trees would take time to mature. Okay, so these are the existing photographs. So this is from wheat fields looking into the site. So as you saw on site, it's approximately half this field would be developed, so around here. And again, this is looking the other direction. So Bernard's Hall is here, and then the development would sort of come just before these buildings in a line here. So again, about half the field, a bit less. Again, looking back, it's again another photo from Wheatfields. So this existing landscaping would be retained and improved, and this would be sort of a sort of edge, and then there would be the housing and then more landscaping. Again, so this is showing it from Watfield Road, so the village is that way. So as you can see parts of Wheatfields, but sort of the further you get from the village, the less abrasive it is. And there is already some mature planting on the edge. So it's not completely terrible what the existing situation is. Again, you can see that's wheat fields there with some landscaping in front. So this is just to explain the footway proposals. So as part of this application, the Highway Authority has requested that a new footway is put in to the village school, which is just here. The entrance is just here. So that would go around there and then meet the main pavement on Watfield Road. So that would be considered a benefit of the scheme. So in conclusion, the recommendation is to refuse, as set out on page 54 of your report. It's considered that it's an unsustainable location, which will be highly dependent on private vehicles, and that there is some landscaping harm due to the loss of open character and rural setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We have members of the public present for this one. Michael Robeson, if you would like to come forward, sir. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. You can stand or sit. Perhaps you should remain there at the end, and I'll see if there's any questions for you. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm here on behalf of the Parish Council.
Can you put the mic on?
Okay. Yes, good morning. I'm here on behalf of the Parish Council, and I'm a resident of Watfield. The parish would like to express their appreciation that the planning officers have visited the site and recommend that the application should be rejected. We concur with this recommendation. As the strategic planning team acknowledge, the proposal would disproportionately expand a rural settlement where sustainability and infrastructure is poor, and a major proposal would exacerbate that situation. Baber's recent planning housing policy states a 5-year supply has already been identified. Baber's emerging local plan identifies a single new dwelling over the same period for Watfield. So this proposal is in direct and material contradiction to Baber's own independent assessment. The committee report refers to Watfield neighbourhood plan process, which, whilst not yet complete, we do feel should be considered. Based on the provision analysis of residents' questionnaire, we believe we can state that this proposal would overwhelmingly be against the democratic wishes of the village. The parish questions the applicant's timing of their application in relation to the perceived outcome of the neighbourhood plan, in that it is an attempt to circumvent parish scrutiny. Moreover, it should not be overlooked that a previous application on this site has been refused by the committee on grounds of unjustified and sustainable development. We also think it worth emphasising that due to poor bus services, amenities and employment opportunities, there is a very high level of car dependency in the village. So increased numbers would increase traffic and hence harm to the environment. Finally, there are a number of loose ends the applicant has failed to address. The flood and water assessment has not been resolved. There is no submitted evidence that substantiates the demand or need for additional housing. The issue of sustainable school numbers has been raised. Our belief is that irrespective of development, the school's excellent reputation and good Ofsted rating means the school will always be at or near capacity. New development will not change the dynamics of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, have you any questions for the last speaker? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything you wish to comment on what you just heard? The Anglia, the water?
Only that at the moment we have to give the neighbourhood plan very limited weight because it's in very early stages.
We have an objector, Mr. Roy Searle. You also have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. That should remain at the end of it, and I'll see if there's any questions for you. Thank you.
Ready? Good morning. I believe it's still good morning, just. Thank you for this opportunity for me to express the views of the villagers who have clearly laid out their concerns and are reflected and summarised on page 44 of the Planning Officer's report. In addition to our listed concerns reflected in the 43 objections, I would like to cover the following points. Baber has identified that there is no urgent need for additional housing and that they do not have a housing shortfall, and the fact they are benefiting from having a 5-year land position. This is also reflected in the Officer's report on pages 45 and 53. There is no evidence supporting this development would address a shortfall, as Baber has stated they do not have a shortfall. In addition to this development, we have an impact on the village's very limited amenities. In fact, we feel it will have an opposite stroke negative impact. This development will have an environmental impact and will cause significant increase in car usage within the village area. Watfield has a very limited bus service, which would not service any commuter requirements at all. In addition to the bus service, this may well be under threat in the near future. The remote location of Watfield will require personal transport to get to and from 1, main town amenities and services, 2, places of work and employment. There is no employment opportunities in Watfield. This view is also concluded in the Officer's report and is highlighted as remote from local services, remote from transport modes. The scale and location of this development will cause harm to the landscape of the village and will not blend or merge with the existing village layout nor the existing village envelope. Finally, we feel that the position of this development will not allow cohesion within the village and will put a strain on the close-knit community spirit still found in Watfield Village. We fully support the officer's recommendations to refuse this application. Again, thank you for the time.
Thank you very much for that. Members, any questions you wish to put to the Speaker? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I probably should have asked this to the last speaker, but as you live in the village, you might not be able to tell me. Does the village have good broadband connection?
Definitely no, I think there. Right. Any other questions, members? Councillor Ayres.
I used to travel through there a lot. My children used to go to school there. Do you still have a village shop?
No.
Thank you.
No amenities in the village whatsoever, aside from the village hall, the church and the school.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Barrett.
I lingered over the buzzer there. You saw me. I think there's mentioned that there is a preschool, though, is there?
Yes, there is a school. It's very small. It's about 50 places. Oh, no, sorry. No, I don't know. There's no preschool.
I think I heard no.
Yes, definitely no. Sorry.
Can you turn your mic off? Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Is there anything, Elizabeth, that you wish to know? Thank you. We'll move on. We have the applicant agent, Philip Branston. You, sir, I think know the procedure, but I will just remind you of 3 minutes. You can sit or stand, and then I'll see if there's any questions at the end of it for you. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and Councillors. I am here today to speak in support of the application for a residential development of 25 dwellings, including 8 affordable units. The proposals before you have evolved over some time, with early scheme being presented to the residents of the Parish Council back in 2018. As the officer's report notes, the site falls outside the built-up area boundary of the village, however, does abut it, and there is little or no opportunity for the village to grow further within the village envelope. The proposal consists of a mix of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses and bungalows, and purposely excludes any large 4 and 5 bedroom properties in the view of providing suitable housing to deal with the local and district need. The application is an outline form, however we have openly discussed with the case officer applying a planning condition to enforce the proposed mix. This type and size of housing will aid to support the village, provide smaller starter homes for younger residents who wish to remain in the village, and for elder residents to downsize and release further housing stock. I appreciate that the case officer has concluded that the site is unsustainable. However, I believe that hinterland villages, such as Watfield, can absorb a certain level of development and that it is important to extend existing communities. A development of this nature with smaller family homes will also support Watfield Village School, with local children attending their local school. This support will be extended by providing a footpath link from the school as viewed at the recent committee site visit. The applicant has already agreed for this with the planning officer that it will be funded by the development. I would also like to recall the committee decision made in 2018 against officer's recommendation on sustainability grounds for the land east of King George's playing field in Raydon, where the committee commented that Baber District Council is a rural district and that not all journeys can be made without the use of a motor vehicle, and approved 24 dwellings which are currently under construction. That leads me into the deliverability of the site. The site is relatively small, only 1.84 hectares in area and in a single ownership. The proposed vehicle access lead directly onto an adopted highway with no ransom strips and good, safe visibility. I can confirm the applicant is already in discussion with a local quality developer with experience in the village completing its successful Church Farm site last year. In conclusion, councillors, I ask you to consider the development put before you and judge the obvious planning gains of appropriate, affordable and market housing, support to the village school and the benefits to the village community, and balance these with the officer's recommendation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions to the last speaker? Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to ask what engagement you've undertaken with the parish council in respect of the application.
Yep, we originally met with the parish council about 18 months ago and said we'd like to present our proposals to them, and within probably a 6-month period we actually had a public presentation in the village hall, and yeah, lots of visitors, and took on board comments, interested in what people had said, and then progressed our scheme from there.
Yes, good morning, Philip. Have you taken any steps or of engagement to ensure that the 8 affordable homes actually go to Watfield or local people?
We haven't at this stage, but that's something that we're most happy to do as part of the 106 to enforce that is the case. Yeah, that's not a problem. The landowner is relatively local and would want to see that happen, and was involved in previous generations were involved in the Wheatfields development. So it's something that they would be pleased to do. Yeah. And actually, the developer that is potentially interested is already who's developing at Raiden. They've just actually Babe have just purchased their affordable housing in the Raiden development. So that could be something that could tie
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Anything you wish to say? No. Right. The local ward member, Councillor Jemison, is a member of the planning committee, and he's chosen to take part in the meeting, so I'll go straight to you first. We're now in open debate.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As I know villages do need to grow, and Watfield, talking to the residents, are not against developments per se, and they have, I believe, on part of their neighbourhood plan, identified some areas within the built-up area boundary for potential development in the future. However, looking at this development, my concerns are pretty much already been highlighted by the residents and the planning officer. The fact this village is, as you saw yourselves when we were on the site visit, it's only a small village. There's no infrastructure, no shops, no doctors, etc. The school, Suffolk County Council, I believe, has said there are no places in the foreseeable future. It's full near capacity now. The bus services, has been pointed out, are very limited, and there's one bus a day at the moment, 2 on a Thursday, Monday to Friday. They're going to be under threat in March. So these things, I mean, these are a concern with this development, which is or potentially be a 16% increase on the size of the village. While not particularly against, I want to be open-minded about the development. I do worry that such an increase would put a lot of pressure on this village, and also it would also, as pointed out by the planning officer, be predominantly reliant on vehicle traffic. Now, as a council, we've just declared a climate emergency and a biodiversity emergency yesterday, and we've, 25 houses, potentially 50 cars, lots more vehicle movement. That's I worry that's going to put a dent in our climate emergency targets. So that's my concerns at the moment is particularly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jemison. Anything you wish to comment on what you've heard? No? Good. Any other comments? No? Right, well, if view of that, there's nothing coming forward. I will move from the chair the officer's recommendation for refusal. Do I have a seconder? Well, you obviously wasn't paying attention at that moment. I'll withdraw that and allow the debate to continue. Please be more alert.
Sorry, Chair. A major part of the recommendation for refusal stems on the sustainability of the location. So I really want to challenge that, because I think that's based on quite outdated ideas about what is achievable in the rural area. So many of our applications are based in rural areas, and we have to really accept that services don't survive in these sort of locations like shops and so on. So, but many people use their supermarkets at home delivery, or are leaving the village anyway, and so not necessarily generating extra journeys by not having a local shop. So one point. Also, we're moving into an area where we are going to have more electric cars, and there's quite a big move politically to encourage more electric vehicles. I think you'd accept. Now it's very much on the agenda, and I think we are going to see a major change in that in the future. Also on the school, as I've said previously, these village schools are vulnerable to low school places, and it's only got 55 attending the school at the moment, with quite a large cohort leaving either last summer or this year. I'm not sure from the report. But when that happens, you know, they might not have places at the moment, but each year they've got that pressure to fill new places because the pupils move up the school all the time. So it's never static like that. And they are incredibly vulnerable to and teeter on the edge of viability themselves by having concerns about new pupils coming forward. And if these villages are allowed to just not have new development put in place, the school becomes one of those things that is at risk of closure, as we've seen in Monks Ely only a couple of years ago, when you know, parents will be concerned if there's only 4 children in their schools, in their child's year group. Do they really want the child to attend a school like that when they've got so limited opportunities for friendship groups? So I think all these villages do absolutely need some development. You've already got the adjacent wheat fields, and I don't know how long that's been built. But what normally happens with those developments is that the families move in with young children, they grow up, they go through the different age range of the school, and then they come out. And so then you kind of need a new supply of younger families. Also, these villages, they're so expensive for people who've grown up in those villages to live in. So having a new supply of affordable houses is an incredibly attractive option for the school and for the village. So I know it's recommend refusal, but I think some of that is built on really the wrong premise, and I want to challenge that. I think we've seen some of the demonstration you've shown us about the impact on the landscape. I think, like many of these areas, we have to consider the addition of landscaping and softening of those can improve the impact on the landscape significantly. As we saw on the photographs showing wheat fields, that doesn't impact very heavily on the local landscape. So there's no reason why this should not have the same in a number of years. I can't accept the recommendation of refusal. I'd like to hear more debate first.
Thank you very much. You put forward quite a few valid points there. Can you pick some of those up, Elizabeth?
In relation to the school, there has been, so the year who's just left now, last year's year 6, they had 10 pupils, and in reception this year is 9 pupils. So the County Council have looked at this, and they are not, it is a small school, it's only got a 9 per year, and it's always been historically small, but they're not concerned about, particularly about falling numbers. They feel it is sustainable in this, you know, at 9 a year going forward. And also, the school allowing new housing, it's not necessarily going to help the school, because obviously parents have preference, school preference, and some parents will decide to, you know, go to a different school. So there are children in that village who don't go to the school, and equally there are children who are brought into the village because they want them to go to a small school. So there isn't necessarily that connection.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Just
Okay,
one,
yes, would like to come back.
From an employment point of view, a lot of people do work at home now and rely on broadband connection to be able to do that. So the rural nature and the isolated nature is perhaps less significant if they are doing that. Could there be anything in SIL to achieve better connection for the village, or is it actually planned? Is Suffolk County Council planning some improvements there?
Well, Suffolk County Council is rolling out an ambitious programme of bringing broadband to Suffolk, but I don't know quite what it is at the Boxford side. I don't know. Sorry, Boxford, Watford area. Can you help us?
I can't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously the local representative said that the broadband was poor, and we haven't had a lot of objections based on broadband, where other places where it is incredibly poor, we have had a lot of people say, you know, there aren't those facilities. So I don't know whether it's any worse than any other rural areas within Baber.
Councillor Jameson, have you any idea? No? Right. I can't give you that full answer, I'm afraid. But I know throughout the county of Suffolk County Council is trying to get as full a coverage as possible. But there are some little black areas, I'm afraid. Yep. Any other questions, comments? No? Nothing coming forward? No. Councillor Osborne?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few comments. I mean, when we were on the site visit, I heard some news, well, not news, but going back in time with Watfield, the Anglo-Saxon setup that was there, which I was very impressed with. However, what I would say is that the chances of a village actually going down, and therefore no young people in there, as Councillor Barrett has spoken about, obviously is a big issue. However, I'm sure that if there were further issues in Watfield, we would have heard it today from the parish and the objector. So therefore, I'm afraid, as the officer's refusal recommendation is for refusal, I'm afraid there's very little that we can do about that. Although I am very disturbed to hear the position of Watfield in terms of the amount of people that are in there, residents that are actually there.
Thank you. Any other comments, views? Nothing coming forward? Right, you leave it. I have no choice, members, but to put forward the officer's recommendation as laid out on your paper before you for refusal. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Plum. I did see your hand go up eventually, but I'd already started, so I was going to finish. Did you wish to comment as you seconded? Okay. It's been proposed and seconded that we move the officer's recommendation for refusal as set out in your papers. All those in favour, please show. Right. Those against? One.
One against, and...
No, I don't take extensions.
No, Chair, you have to take abstentions. You can't decide not to.
I've never accepted abstentions.
That is
under
the law.
No. Members of a planning committee are put in here to make decisions, not to sit on fences. But anyway, that's my opinion. I've said it. Is there any abstentions? Thank you. We'll move on. We have the next one, which is, sorry, I was on the wrong page there. Page 57. We're still at Watfield, members. Case officer for this one is Daniel Cameron. Okay, Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Are we okay?
Nearly there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Yes, so remaining in Watfield for the time being, we've got an application before us in outline for 15 dwellings, 6 of which will be affordable, with all matters reserved save for access. Here is the site. We have Watfield Road running along the south. We have Norton Road running along here. We've got a strip of linear development along the sort of northwest side there. We've got the Church Lane development here, and then we have the rest of Watfield down here. Just in terms of constraints, members, you'll see we're within the cordon sanitaire. That relates to the sewage treatment works down here. We've had representations from Anglian Water who operate and are responsible for the sewage treatment works, and they've not objected to the principle of development within this area. Indeed, if you look at the cordon, you'll see that quite a lot of Watfield as it exists generally now would fall within it. We've also got the listed building up here, that's Watfield Hall, it's Grade 2 listed. There's also just off picture a street farmhouse which is on the run of Watfield Road as it comes down here, a little way to the south of the site. In consulting with colleagues from Heritage, they haven't found it necessary to comment on this application due to the degree of separation between this site and the listed buildings. In terms of other constraints, the sort of vague green shading across this entire map is the Watersham Airfield Safeguarding Area. We're dealing with residential development here, members, so we have existing 2-storey development along in this area. Obviously, we're dealing with an outline application, so design, appearance, layout would all be reserved matters, so we'd have additional consultation from them should you be minded to approve when the application comes back at that stage. The other thing to note, and it's apologies members, it's not shown very well on this map, but there is sort of a vague red sheen as well. That just denotes that we're inside the impact area on 2 triple SIs, that's sites of special scientific interest, and those are Elmset Woods, which is some way to the east, and then Woolswood, which is sort of southeast off the bypass at Hadley. Key issues are similar to the previous application before members. We have the policy context set out for you at section 3 of the report. We have the sustainability issues with regards to the 3 strands running through the NPPF, the social, the economic and the environmental. We have the impact on the character of the village. You'll see from the existing aerials, and when I bring later slides up, that Watfield at this point is generally quite linear. Yes, we have some estate development at Wheatfields that we've just looked at, and also at the Church Lane development. And then there's also an issue of footpaths that my colleague previously touched upon, and we'll go over that as well. Just with regard to late representations, we did have additional surveys carried out in the form of a Great Crested Newt survey and a report on biodiversity enhancement within the site, specifically aimed at breeding birds. Those have been received and sent to our ecology consultants at Place Services, and they've removed their holding objection reported in the report, and are now not listing objection, subject to securing the ecological mitigation and biodiversity enhancement contained within those reports. So if members should be minded to approve the application, we should be looking to condition that that is included as well. Coming back up to the aerial map, again, you'll note the linear run of development along here and the small cul-de-sac development, but the rest of Watfield is largely linear along this run of Watfield Road. Here we have the layout. Obviously, this is an outline with many matters reserved. The only issue for consideration by members at the moment is this access point here onto Norton Road. That would be unchanged as the application came back if you were minded to approve, members. We've just created an overlay to show the site layout in context there. We've got this existing agricultural field bounded on all sides by existing hedgerow and mature tree planting. We're taking a corner of it. The agricultural field is grade 3 land, as was the previous application, I believe. And we're just showing the arrangement as indicated on the indicative plans within that, so you can see the relationship between the rest of Watfield and this application. We have got an indicative landscape plan submitted with the application. It shows retention of boundary landscape treatment to this side and the bottom of the site, and then introduction of a new belt of planting up here to provide a barrier to the rest of the agricultural site. So the rest of the field would remain in agricultural use as it currently is. If we move on to the site photos, I recall members will have had a site visit here, so should hopefully be familiar with the site. This is at the access point to the site. This is looking back into Watfield. A lack of sort of pavement and footway connecting into the rest of the village. From this point, members, it's 750 metres to the school. The location, obviously, is as you saw in the last officer's report. There's good visibility display shown from this point, and then if we jump ahead, we can see the linear run of development up on the left-hand side of the screen, members, the existing hedgerow along the frontage. Again, there's a good degree of visibility, but again, noting no footpath connection up to the rest of the village. If we come now, this is the access point, and we're looking into the site. So this is the portion of the site that would remain agricultural land and will be accessed elsewhere. And then this is the other aspect of the site that would be, so we have the existing boundary planting that would be retained along here and here, and then this is part of the site that would form the access and then be laid out for members. The recommendation before members is for refusal of the application for similar reasons to the previous application. In terms of social and economic sustainability, while there is some benefit, the benefit is limited. In terms of environmental, there is some enhancement of biodiversity, there's some mitigation of impacts, so we have some positive weight to attribute here. But in terms of connectivity, both within the village and within the wider district, officers consider the site would be largely dependent on private car transport to meet the needs of the residents, and have therefore found that when judged against all three strands together, the site would fail the sustainability tests as set out within the NPPF.
Thank you. We have members of the public here. Parish Council David Dray. You've heard the procedures. I don't need to go through it. Perhaps you'd remain seated at the end of the 3 minutes. Thank you.
Right, good morning. And can I thank you for taking the trouble to come and see our site and walk it and survive it without body armour or any other form of natural protection. But it meant that you could see for yourself the reality, and I would like to thank Mr Cameron for the thoroughness of his rather damning report on what we see as something which is being sneaked under the wire while we are trying to develop our neighbourhood plan. That has been pushed through very quickly and with some very poorly thought through ideas. It has been criticised even by Highways for their plan to build a footpath that is supposedly going to connect through the village. It's impossible. It's not thought through thoroughly. Problems start to develop very quickly when you look at it. The housing stock anyway in Baber, we know, is sufficient for 5 years. There is no requirement on the outskirts of our village in open fields to start building more homes. We actually do have a site within the village which could take quite a few, which is being examined by the owners now. So we do have capacity in the village. But there is no demand at the moment anyway Our latest development that we did support, which is not far from there, still has 20% of its housing stock for sale. That's after nearly 2 years. So we have several properties which are still for sale throughout the village. It is taking a long time for them to go. No housing needs assessment was produced for this application, and I think I know why. The design is poor, Mr. Cameron pointed out, projects into open countryside. It's not in keeping with the landscape locally. The northern boundary, he said, doesn't even appear logical or natural. It's out of keeping with the linear nature of the road. It certainly is. It takes up less than 1/3 of a huge field. And its boundary of the development goes up to a road which separates it from our local sewage works. What would be a suitable name for development that close to a sewage works? Watfield Sewage Farm Development? I don't know. All the fertiliser you can get. And it's very close. This is not well thought through. Isolated on a road which is medieval, where people cannot safely go down that road now with the growing traffic. You've seen that there are no pavements. You can see what would happen to a ghetto development in an area where there is no ability to mix with the community, to be part of a village. They would be isolated, totally dependent on cars, because our bus service is scarcely existent. Mr. Cameron's, I think, already damned this idea. I don't think I need to add more. I just ask you to support us and his recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. You mentioned that you are developing your neighbourhood plan and that there is a site that you have identified. Can you tell us where that is and how many dwellings?
Well, they are separate things. The neighbourhood plan is under preparation now. That is going through. We've carried out a survey of the village. The questionnaire is now being checked. And my colleagues behind me are all part of that team. So we are now about, I'd say at least halfway through the process of developing a neighbourhood plan to ensure that we have control over unscrupulous building on either side of the village. But we are looking at possibilities within the village. Now, I cannot say anything about that because we need to wait for the owner of that land to decide what they want to do and then to discuss that with our council and our village community.
Do you have any site allocations in your forthcoming plan?
At the moment, we have not reached a point where our plan can actually be specific.
So the answer is no.
So we're not at that stage, not yet.
Thank you.
I did ask how many dwellings there might be on this.
Well, potentially from an application that was made years ago, but I think there'd be fewer dwellings offered if that were to be put forward now. We would anticipate something like 8 dwellings. Considering that we've already built 22 in the last 3.5 years, 1 or 2 of which are still for sale, I'd have thought for a small village like ours, that's pretty good going.
Thank you.
One final thing, sorry. You said you built some recently. Is that a rural exception site?
No, the last development was built by Landex, and that was also originally a Knock Cuts site. But it was built with our agreement and really our great approval in the village because it was on derelict land, which was once connected to a farm there, Church Farm. And we felt that that was a very good use of the space because that land had not been used for many years, had old farm buildings, was overrun with vermin, and was not accessible to anyone. Now we have a very pleasant, very attractive development, and we also have a field next to it, which is open for all villagers to enjoy.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most of the ones I was going to ask, Councillor Barrett has done it. But may I just say that the way you've talked on this application is excellent. Just the final point about the local plan, how far have you, or national, got a bit out of kilter there. How long did you actually, I can't remember, did you say you've got a time scale that you will complete that in?
We wouldn't want to do that at the moment because my colleagues behind me, including the gentleman who's going to speak to you next, is a member of that team.
Right.
And because they've now had to get our questionnaire back, and we've had a very, very large response, the village have been very enthusiastic to show that they want to be involved in controlling our future. So they're taking a long time to go through the responses, and I think they're very close to completing that. Then we can start to take those responses and decide how we're going to apply them to our long-term plan.
Thank you.
One final thought, Mr. Chairman. It might be $1 million question, but how, and I'm not trying to be aged here at all, but how is your young people there? How many have you there in regard to the future? Say that any application that comes forward will take at least 3 years anyway. So,
are you referring to the families of children? Right. The situation with every Suffolk village like ours is that we're ageing. We're all getting older. People tend to go to a village like ours and they stay there.
I'm sorry, but...
I'm trying to put this in context.
Yes, but you are taking rather a long time. I think the answers need to be a bit shorter.
All right, I've been a teacher for too many years. I do apologise. The situation is that the number of families in the village is easily sufficient to sustain our school. However, we have a situation where most local schools no longer depend at all on the local population of families. Many parents now choose to send their children to a school of their choice, unlike 60 years ago when you sent your child, in most cases, down the road. And at the moment, one of the reasons why they don't always send them down the road, it's quite dangerous to get down there, as you've seen.
Good answer. Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come in there? I did live out of the village and took my children to Watfield, so I appreciate that people would come out of the village. But also, I'd like to know how has the traffic increased, having had a flat tyre exactly on that stretch of road, and I changed the wheel myself.
Very unfortunate. I'm sorry for that to hear.
And I felt I was dicing with death then. How bad is it now?
The situation deteriorates by the month, and the reasons are varied, but it's connected partly not just because of Watersham Air Base. There are many other reasons why everyone travels by car. I'm an exception. I tend to use a bike more in the village. Very dangerous as well. The situation down that stretch of road is that we have an SID, a camera, which we put up to measure the intensity of traffic. And I've got the job of analysing that every couple of months. And I analysed that this weekend. And I'm sorry, I'm going to get in the way of my colleague here. I'm sure he would mention it. But we know that there are, on average, 2,000 cars a day at the end of August and the first week of September going through the village. This is provable data from our SID. And that worries us tremendously because I've been doing this for 2 years. The trend is upwards. Our roads are becoming more dangerous and more filled with hazards, particularly for our youngsters and older people.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. And my second question was, the houses that are still up for sale, could you give me some indication of why they're not being sold? Are they expensive?
Well, I'm not going to mention the Brexit word because that puts off many people, I fear, at this time anyway.
Councillor, did you not see them? We were showing them on our site inspection.
Sorry, I did give my apologies. I had to take three
right,
ladies
sorry.
away. But I
Then
do
you can
know the
answer.
village, so I didn't see them.
But the places that are still up for sale, I mean, we've got 20% of the ones in our new development up for sale. These were priced above the average for the village because they're new and they're beautifully designed.
Can you keep your answers short, please?
I'll try. The other properties in the village, there are some which are quite cheap, which haven't gone, which are, well, by cheap I mean 2-bedroom, affordable more. And there are others which are more expensive. We found that in a village like ours, they tend to take a long time to sell because many families prefer not to come into a fairly isolated community where their needs may well be elsewhere, for example, closer to the edge of a town. So they tend to go, but very, very slowly, and at the moment, particularly slowly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Barrett?
I was interested in the size of the population of Watfield. And I went on a website about Watfield, and your population is recorded as being 310.
No, it's above that. So I don't know which website you saw, but it's wrong. Our population has gone up because of the developments in the last few years. So it may well be that you were going back to what was census information, which could have been, 9 years ago. But because of the building that we've allowed to take place, it is now just under 400. And the number of buildings, of course, has gone up by 22.
I'll interrupt you there. I think your figure's nearer the figure, but we do have it here.
Sorry, Councillor Barrett. Just having a very quick look. I know I'm not a planning officer, but just looking on the Suffolk Observatory with the most recent data from 2017, the estimate there was 372.
It'll be slightly higher now.
Yeah.
Slightly higher.
Okay, I don't know if we can rely on the same website, but in 1838 it was 381. So I think there's still some room.
And they were all farming.
Still some room for the numbers to go up.
I'm sure a school teacher could give us the history lesson on
I
that,
could
but
give you a lot
we
of
won't
answers
open
to
that
that.
up, sir. We won't open that up. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions to the speaker? No? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Could I just reiterate, Chair, it was mentioned already by, I think, Ms Flood on the previous one, the neighbourhood plan carries just about no weight at all at the moment. So the discussion about that and this together, it shouldn't really weigh on your consideration.
Very limited. We have John Botel. You, sir, also have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and perhaps at the end of it you'd remain so and see if there's any questions for you. You're not a school teacher, sir, are you? You're not a school teacher? No, okay then.
Heaven forbid.
No disrespect, sir, at the back there.
Good morning. John Botel, Norton Road. My main concern is the volume of traffic passing through our village. I've been an owner-occupier in Norton Road for over 30 years, and in that time I've seen an exponential increase in traffic growth with 2 commuter bulges, one between 7 and 9 a.m. and the other from 4 to 7. This proposed development will only make matters worse, as many families now have 2 or more cars. The planning officer has recognised these concerns in his report. I'd like to explain in a bit more detail the risks involved. My fellow resident has indicated that the speed indicator devices show over 2,000 cars a day coming through. This excludes traffic to and from Elmsett on the other road. You will be aware there are no pedestrian pavements for the whole of Norton Road and most of the village, and we do not have street lighting. There is a pinch point just outside Church Farm House, and this is situated between Norton Road and the rest of Watfield. This narrows the road down to 4.6 metres or 15 feet, measured from the grass verge to the opposite curb. A bus or large lorry is a minimum of 2.25 metres or 8 feet wide. So it follows that one of 2 buses or large lorries will have to give way for the other to pass, which will mean pulling into the side or overlapping the verge. There are several young families that live in Norton Road itself. Parents and children walking to our primary school face a daily challenge, having to rely on good-natured motorists to give them room. Some solve this problem by driving to school, thereby further increasing traffic. But the older children returning from Hadley schools have no choice. They have to walk in the road between bus stops. It is noticeable that traffic leaving Watfield in an easterly direction tends to increase speed when passing the 30-mile sign outside number 5. By the time it reaches the other speed sign at the far end of the road, most of it will be breaking the speed limit and approaching 50 miles an hour. This will be even more of a danger if another road junction comes directly into the road from the proposed development. And additionally, one further matter, the field for this development is seasonal to flooding with standing water, which in wet winters occurs in a large swathe opposite the adjacent sewage works. This water seeps onto the Elmstead Road, causing black ice. The sewage farm also causes a noticeable increase in houseflies and mosquitoes in the summer, which will be far worse for any new residents nearby. From questionnaires taken as a part of our village plan, road safety is a major worry for residents of Norton Road and Watfield as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions to the last speaker? No? Thank you very much. We do not have a supporter, applicant, agent or county councillor, so we'll now go into open debate, and the local ward member, Councillor Jamieson, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My concerns are again pretty similar to they were with the Wheatfields development. As has been pointed out, the lack of services in the village and the increased traffic. The problem with this, one of the problems with this development, although it's smaller than the Wheatfields proposed development, this one is in a more in a worse position. Traffic from this development will have to go either through Watfield at the end of the village where there is no footpath, and this has been pointed out where there's pinch points, through Norton, down Norton Road, which is another small village, or down the single track road, Watfield Road, towards Elmset. I know, as Councillor Barrett pointed out, this may not be an issue because people may have electric cars in the future and people may have their shopping delivered, but they're all things that may happen. People who move into the village will have cars, and they do have, but we don't know these people will have. So it is going to increase traffic in the village. It's going to put more pressure on the village, as has been pointed out by the residents, so it is a concern. I do worry about what effect it will have. And as has been pointed out, there's developments already down the end of the village that took a long while to sell and are still up for sale. So I mean, developing more properties doesn't guarantee they're going to be sold. That's it, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments you wish to make on what you've heard? No. Any other questions? Comments? Debate? Councillor Plum.
All I was going to say was it'd be a horrible precedent if we approved this one after having refused the last one. So I'd like to move approval of the officer's recommendations.
Refusal of the officer's recommendation.
Approval of the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Norman, do you wish to comment? No. Okay. Any other comments? No. Right.
I would just say, because it is different to the last application, which I recommended refusal of the approval. Anyway, I'm not going to go against the officer recommendation on this one, because it is at the other end of the village. It's away from the school. It does require pupils to probably go onto the road at some stage on their journey to school. And it's rather near sewage works, so for those reasons, I'm going to go with the officer recommend.
Thank you. Any other comments, members? No? It's been proposed by Councillor Plum and seconded by Councillor Norman that we accept the officer's recommendation for refusal that's set out in your papers before you. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. Good. Decisions made. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Teacher. Members, will move on to page 75 for the Crown Build and Sudbury. Pardon? You've been so good today, I'm going to have to say yes. page 75, and it's over to Jack again.
Thank you, Chair. So the final item is item 6D. It is for the Crown Building on Newton Road in Sudbury. This application has been to committee before in outline form. And what we're here to determine today is the details with regards to landscaping, and it is landscaping only. I'm not sure whether you can read that clearly, but
No,
just to
we can't.
provide context, the application reference dating back to 2018 as granted in November was for the erection of up to 19 apartments. This was approved in outline form with select details excluding landscaping. Another application then came through at a later date, December 2018. It was approved as it was Section 73 application. Since then, we've had the latest application, which was granted August 2019, so not too long ago, with regards to discharge of conditions. Now, that related to agreement of materials, landscape and protection, park landscape scheme, construction management, surface water drainage, screen walls and fences, illumination, fire hydrants and car stackers. So all we're here to determine today is the landscaping detail that's included on the plan. So I will jump through to the application site. So on the approach into Sudbury, on the right hand side we have a derelict piece of land which I believe was a former tax office. Again, principles established. It is only the landscaping detail we're looking at. So the land does slope from east down to west as you approach the junction. There are residential dwellings to the north and Bellevue opposite, as you should hopefully be able to relate to. In terms of the existing site, there are good quality trees along the northern and southern boundaries. And this is the proposed plan simply for landscaping. So I'll take you through the colours if I may. So there are various turfed features throughout the site. The layout is fixed and approved. The scale is fixed and approved. The access is fixed and approved. We are looking at purely the landscaping. So the blue hoops, which hopefully you can just relate to along this northern boundary, depict the biggest and best trees that are to be retained. There's also some along the southern boundary as well, and towards the back of the site what will be along the western boundary. The pink shows tarmacked areas for parking. This is wholly acceptable to your officers. And the orange depicts fence lines. So this is largely a relatively open site. Once you get into site, especially, naturally along boundary features you'd expect a degree of privacy, and the scheme does provide for that. I'll jump through to the next slide, which will hopefully jog your memory. These are the more prominent trees along the southern boundary, adjacent to the main road. These will be retained. At sort of ground level, there would be fresh planting in terms of shrubbery. This is the largest tree that is along the northern boundary. And again, that same tree, as you can see, you can just about see the properties to the north behind the established hedgerow. There is a wall amongst this that would be retained. Effectively, there were concerns raised by nearby residents which related to the value of property. This is not a material planning consideration, but I do raise it for completeness. This is a view from the adjacent street, and again the frontage would be heavily planted with low-level shrubbery. So just to confirm and summarise, your officers do support the proposal. This is strictly for landscaping with all other details through and approved by committee. And the recommendation is for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, members, you'll be pleased to know we don't have any Town Council, objector, supporter, applicant, agent or county councillor. So we go to the ward member, which is also a member of the committee, Councillor Adrian Osborne.
So now debate, Chair.
Yeah.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, just a question to Jack. The Town Council's response on this was you have received, haven't you? And I can't just remember what their response was to this. Was there an objection?
No, there was
No
no objection.
objection.
Approve the landscaping scheme.
Approve, right.
Their comments word for word, because I remember copying it across.
Yeah.
Approve the landscaping scheme, providing the hedgerow that runs along the footpath be maintained.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you. The other point was from residents that were actually to the left of the plant in the hedge, where the wall is. His comment to me was the width of the grass verge that runs from that access round to Newton Road, that is not being reduced in any way. That is being kept the same. He thought when he looked at the plans that was been reduced in width, but it obviously isn't, is it?
That is correct. The width of that verge would be retained as county council ownership. Secondly, you're probably looking at the width of a line on a plan. So in terms of plotting it correctly, that is well beyond the point of return in terms of what has been approved and what would be delivered.
Fantastic. And there's obviously no roof garden. I've got no objection, Mr. Chairman, and I'll go with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Right. I think that was roundabout a way of a recommendation to approve, was it? It was. Right, well, I will take a seconder and then I'll come to you. Councillor Parker, your seconder, would you like to comment?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to second the proposal. Just for as a matter of interest, why has this come back to us? Why was this not on the original proposal?
I think for procedural soundness, the application is considered as 19 units. More than 15 units requires determination by members. This is a spin-off application from that, i.e. the detail, so it had to come back, I'm afraid.
There's obviously 19 apartments that I was unaware of, so I've now got another 19 apartments.
Well, you might find your way round now then, Councillor Osborne. We won't go there. If you saw the emails going backwards and forwards, that it wasn't his area. But anyway, won't comment. Councillor Ayres.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like to second that because of being on... Oh, sorry, I thought... You third it. Oh, I third it.
Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick comment. If the officer could put up the first one with the nice little coloured blobs on it. That one, yes. Why have we got some tarmacked areas and some permeable areas for car parking? Why aren't they all the same? Any particular reason why we've got the red ones, which are tarmacked areas, and yet you've got a car sitting on a permeable area just above it?
I think you have to take into account the gradient of the land and indeed surface water runoff. So I'm not saying that these are going to be at such a gradient or slope that it's going to flood, but at the same time, it's a good blend. I think if you're going to tarmac the entirety of the area, the only thing that would demark the difference between the layout access by tarmac would be a white line. I think it's quite a good design feature to have an alternative tarmac or an alternative surface for spaces. It's good variety.
I wouldn't argue with the permeable surfaces, but I would have thought they would be more preferable to the tarmac on the basis if they were on a slope, instead of the water running down the slope and flooding somebody else, it would soak through.
And again, I think that's a fair comment. I wouldn't disagree to a degree. I think you've got to look at the gradient in that particular area. We are sloping off down into Newton Road, but at the same time, dependent on levels, which are already approved, they're going to need to deliver a surface water, sealed surface water drainage compliant scheme. That's approved. So the surface that comes through with that is at their own disposal.
Hopefully that helps. Councillor Osborne.
I'll just come back, if I may, on that. And I agree with Councillor Hinton here, because can you just clarify the position of permeable surfaces? Because when people put in drives, they must be permanent services. So why have we got a situation like that? Was it accepted? Obviously, I agree. I accept that it was accepted by planning. However, it's a permeable surface, which I'd have thought any council would want to see.
Of course, and I think, drainage details are well beyond the point of return. They are approved. Let's look at it maximally. If the entirety of the site was to be a sealed surface water's going to have to run off somewhere. I think in your consideration of a driveway, if someone puts in a permeable driveway, it would have to be porous and seep through to comply with planning law. Similarly, if you're going to be providing a sealed surface, you'd have to provide an ACO drain so that it runs off and it soaks away elsewhere. This scheme would be no different. However, it would be diverted elsewhere within the site.
Thank you.
I
can see Councillor Hinton's looking puzzled. I think it's fair to point out Councillor Hinton does have some knowledge on flooding.
I think the point is that if it was all permeable, it would look a lot better in terms of ecological reasons and all the rest of it. If it's, as Councillor Osborne is indicating, due to finance, then so be it. Let's tell them to spend a bit more.
At this point,
yeah, I agree with Councillor Hinton, but obviously I can't say what the applicant's got in funding for doing these things. And my final thing is, can I just thank Jack for the effort he has put into this application. It's been a considerable long length of time, and he eventually got there. And I know he's had quite a lot of responses to be able to make to residents locally around that area. Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you for that. I think it's worth noting that most of our planning officers, and I've already congratulated Jack on his previous one, but I think most of our planning officers do put in a lot of work, and we are supported by good officers on the planning committee. And I'd go as far as to say, throughout the council, you're the top of the list as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, that'll get me into trouble, I know. Any other comments, members? No? I've had a proposal from Councillor Osborne, seconded by Councillor Parker, that we accept the officer's recommendation of approval as set out in your papers before you. All those in favour, please show. Another unanimous decision. Well done. Thank you. Well, they've got all the hoarding up, so I think they're about to start. Wait a minute. Right, so there's no site inspection next Wednesday, so the date of the next committee meeting is scheduled for Wednesday the 9th of October at 9:30. Thank you very much. Goodbye.